Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Perspective Philosophy, where we try to better our perceptions of the world through philosophical discussion. Hope everyone's having a lovely night. And tonight I was actually going to review a debate by Cosmic Skeptic and Inspiring Philosophy, which I probably will do after this. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to review the live discussion that's happening right now between Rem the Bathboy and Destiny on the Vaush controversy, shall we call it. So yeah, it should be interesting. I don't know how it's going to go down. I know that Rem obviously thinks that Vaush is an epistemic anti-realist, the same as I do, and pretty much is the one that first pushed him on it. I think Rem should be able to outline the problems with this position. I think he should be able to outline, the problems with Vaush's consistency and his positions as a socialist. So hopefully he'll outline the real issues, and I won't be needed. But I did offer my assistance if it was needed. Don't think they're going to take us up on it, that's the way of life. But, yeah, we're just going to get into this one. And I hope everyone is having a really lovely night. Yeah, so this is the video and I've put it back to the start of this conversation.
I don't understand. Okay. How you doing?
I'm okay. Been a while.
How's life going? How's Canada? I don't think the last time I talked to you, I don't think the coronavirus was a thing. So.
Yeah, well, definitely not to the extent it is now. I mean, it's fine. Our vaccine rollout is not doing very well, but
I'm gonna skip past the little intro. I will say the vaccine rollout in Canada mightn't be very good, but the vaccine rollout in Britain seems pretty good for once. So
well, I'm technically in my final year, but because
what are you planning on doing for?
Or
yeah, but I mean more specific,
like meta philosophy. So it's probably philosophical stuff,
basically.
Skills to copy and because no one's really done a comparative analysis. Believes that truth and knowledge is all.
We're doing philosophy talk.
So he literally believes that truth and knowledge.
So I think
last year I talked to him and I basically got him because he's a hyper form of like an epistemic anti-realist. So he literally believes that truth and knowledge is all subjective and that it's just a game of power. So
kind of, to be where, since we're doing philosophy talks,
he 100% takes that position, by the way, like that it's all about power, because he basically outlined that in my discussion with him as well, and said that everything boils down to the subjective on an epistemic level either, and that there was no such thing as truth, and even rejected science. So yeah, 100%.
The only pushback I would give you is I don't think he's an epistemic anti-realist. I think he just says things that he doesn't realize would lead him to epistemic anti-realism. That's how I feel. Like I don't think he would like.
That's what I thought. But he had a discussion with Perspective Philosophy after your debate, where he seemed to just completely endorse epistemic anti-realism. So he's faced a lot of pushback from it, and he just keeps doubling down. Like he will just completely bite the bullet.
Is he like an epistemic anti-realist like I am? Where I'll say no,
but you still push back on companions and guilt.
Sure.
You don't seem to embrace the companions and guilt and say,
see, that's different. That's not an epistemic anti-realist. Then you're trying to say that there is definitely a normative difference between morality and other epistemic fields. So you're not an anti-realist then in terms of epistemics. Vaush is an anti-realist. He actually just doubles down and goes like, look, everything's subjective, everything must be subjective, and that's a fundamental difference in terms of how we approach reality. Okay, like if you say that like you're a moral anti-realist, but you're a realist in terms of like physics or something, that's a very big difference between something like than saying something like the fact that it takes 8 minutes for the light to get to from the sun to Earth is subjective, which is what he actually said in our debate, that like the Earth or whatever, like orbiting the sun would be subjective, and that's kind of the stance that he took. And if you want the original discussion, it's there it is in the description, Mark.
oh yeah, it's all just how we feel, bro. Like
yeah, that like I'll make that. Yeah, I'll make that as like a top level argument, but then past that, I'll be like, we have to make all the rest of these reasonable. But I won't carry that through to everything, so that if anybody challenges me on anything, I'll just say like, oh well, bro, it's all anti-realism, get fucked or whatever, something like that. Yeah.
No, but when push comes to shove, Vaush's solution is just to push it all the way back to, well, I'm just doing what I can to, make socialism happen. And then
100%. He always brings it back to this, like, ethical foundation, which is why I was asking him, look, why are you underpinning everything with utilitarianism when utilitarianism is 100% based on this understanding of reality? Like, utilitarianism has metaphysical foundations, and yet he was trying to say, like, look, I'll accept this metaphysical foundation if it's good. But it's like, well, mate, like, how would you understand it was good? How would you even be able to understand utilitarianism unless you have some sort of metaphysical claim that instantiates it? And this is what I don't think he understood. And I think that he's a like a hyper, like, existentialist almost, like an absurdist, something that's more akin to like Camus.
And whatever I do, as long as that's the goal, then that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It all comes down to how, and it grounds out in how it makes him feel. Sure. And he basically said, like, if you don't agree with me, then I might as well just kill you.
Because you're an enemy, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just the stupidest shit. Like,
it is pretty stupid.
It's
well, here, let's be okay. So I'm gonna hold you to a higher standard in terms of, because obviously I'll say that or whatever. But more clearly, when you say well, actually, here, let's back up 1 second. Okay, so for people listening, okay, so.
And if anyone wants us to get into the conversation, go let them know that I'm here reviewing it, and that I'll talk to them about my conversation with Vaush, since I've actually spoke to him about it since. But, you know, whatever, man. Like, who cares?
When we say
that,
like epistemology, we're talking about like the study of like truth, or like what is truth, or how do we know what truth is?
What is knowledge?
Yeah, what is knowledge? Sure, it's better. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, like the study of knowledge, essentially, broadly speaking. And we say that somebody is an epistemic anti-realist. In a broad sense, we're kind of saying that this person is claiming almost that there can be no knowledge, or we can't truly know anything, kind of.
Yes.
Not necessarily. Yes. Well, I mean, ultimately, yes, I agree with you, but it's probably just better put as there's no correct system of knowledge.
Sure. Okay. And when we say,
see, I think that's just like what is it? That's just like. It's the same thing, like, you know, with a different like way of saying it. Like, essentially, like, if essentially what you have to do and understand about epistemic anti-realism is that even if it says that knowledge exists in socio-political realms, that there are competing and contesting understandings of reality, like something like Thomas Kuhn in terms of like you know, how we understand science or something like that, like, ultimately, they all boil down to a subjective or socio-relative framework. It's phenomenalism. So what, at the very best. So phenomenalism is essentially the world as appearances, and that's usually the reality that they speak of. So when they talk about knowledge, they don't actually mean anything corresponds with reality, because they would say there is no such thing as the real, and that's a lot of the time what a postmodern epistemic anti-realist would kind of take.
Correct system. When we say there's no correct system of knowledge, we don't mean that this person might think there might be competing logics or whatever.
Oh yeah, I've already offered Rem, but he said like he appreciates the offer, but he's not interested or something.
Might be better than the other, something like that. But this is a person that would say like maybe causality isn't real or something, or they might go like really, really far off the deep end, where like, oh, like literally everything is absurd.
Yeah, I mean, like, the whole point of absurdism, which is what Vaush condoned, actually, he said, look, I'm an absurdist. An absurdist essentially says that there is no foundations to reality. Like, there is, like, we live in an absurd reality. There is no way that we can gain knowledge and understanding. And, you know, it's, things happen and we just, you know, watch them, essentially. We observe. And there's nothing true. There's only appearances. And the distinctions that exist are maybe like something between reality and hyper-reality in a Beauregard sense. And I'm actually talking about all of this actually in my upcoming video in terms of the metaphysics of the Matrix, because this is a very postmodern take, and it's something that definitely relates to how we understand reality itself. And it's honestly, like, I think it's a terrible take in terms of understanding the foundations of the phenomena when it's talking about the metaphysic, and ultimately it's self-defeating. But, you know, people do take this position, and a lot of great philosophy exists in relation to this position. The issue is, I don't think Vaush has even read any of it.
Yeah, and it usually boils down, like, there's no fact of the matter about, like, there being a system of meaning or a system of truth. It all just basically comes down to how I feel about it. Mm-hmm. This is what he very blatantly says. If it helps me, then I will say that is true. Mm-hmm. That's just the way that he operates. And I mean,
can there be I don't know if this makes sense, but can you be an epistemic non-cognitivist?
I mean, yeah, that's what
Yeah, it would be a non-cognitivist. Well, that's how the hell that's happened. Thank you very much for your donation. Double donation as well. Okay.
Yeah, well, that's roughly usually what I mean by epistemic anti-realism.
Okay, gotcha.
And so, like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend there aren't people, in the literature, but there are people in the literature that defend every single view under the earth, right? And I mean, obviously, X amount of people, not believing in it shouldn't just completely discredit the argument, right?
Sure.
But I mean, it is the backwaters of philosophy.
Sure, it's something to think about. If you assert something and everybody in your field disagrees, and you should assert it cautiously, right? So I might say, if I'm an anti-realist on this,
But if you're an anti-realist, you can't assert anything as true, justified, or in any way better than any other position that anyone else can assert. So you end up in a form of prescriptivism, right? Especially in terms of ethics, which means you have competing aesthetic ideals. So you're in a state of war, and ultimately the only one that wins is in terms of power and in terms of the one that's appreciated most, if we can even count that as quote unquote winning. There is no foundation for anything in reality, and so all we are doing is in this kind of Foucauldian understanding of reality is witnessing the episteme. Even in terms of maybe some sort of Zen Buddhist take, you could kind of go with it, where it's you are just the observer and the episteme is kind of just flying around with you. You have no choices in reality, kind of thing. Now, they don't deny the existence of free will, like freedom. They just think that you don't have any way to act rationally or in any way that's appearance based. And so what they do is they say, look, you can act quote unquote rationally, but it's in relation to pure appearances. And then you get the philosophy of people like Leopold, Baudrillard, and I think probably Deleuze as well. So they're the kind of philosophers that would basically be the good representatives of Vaush's position. Obviously, Vaush hasn't read any of them, but it's not like his position is unheard of, and he definitely has an existentialist flair to his work, to his understanding.
50% of philosophers disagree, that should give you pause or whatever, be careful.
Right, it's I still consider myself a scientific anti-realist, but I approach that because I used to be a hardcore scientific realist, and it was only after a number of years and studying
See, I'm definitely not a scientific anti-realist. I think that's ridiculous. I'm a scientific realist, and the reason I'd say it's ridiculous is because all he's doing is really, if I'm honest, Rem, right, all you do is you take the Thomas Kuhn position and you show that, look, there are competing, essentially competing paradigms within the scientific position, and you try and show that as it having no metaphysical relation. Now, it's true, absolutely, the epistemic, the knowledge claims are separate from reality, but which one corresponds best to reality, which one explains reality to the greatest degree is something that can be known, and I think that's absolutely clear, and I think I could definitely argue against that. So if you want to have a debate, Rem, about scientific realism, 100% defend science.
That's all I really took. That's sort of what my institution is really known for, is that area. And it was only after, and actually speaking with some of the leading anti-realists, that I came to adopt that, and I can fully understand why people would be skeptical of it. Right?
Real quick,
argumentation.
Yeah, so somebody in chat just said that this is such a huge fucking stretch from I'd rather have effective misinformation on my side than the enemy side, holy shit. So I think what Rem is referring to is a more detailed conversation that Vaush had with perspective philosophy, not just the conversation that he had with me, I believe.
Yeah, there is a video on my channel. Actually, if you watch that video, all that money goes to that.
When the conversation he had with me, he 100% doubled down and said, look, there is no foundations for ethics in terms of how we should approach reality. And I just want to hear him get pulled up for the socialism stuff, right? So even if we go a little bit further on in the dialectic, so we don't talk about his grounding, even in his application of socialism and his use of the words utilitarian and consequentialism and, morally neutral, I think are devoid of any real meaning. And it's probably because of his, foundational position. But we really need to talk about why he thinks that socialists aren't obligated or are allowed to be capitalists. It just seems absolutely absurd to me that you could argue that a socialist can act as if they were a capitalist in capitalism, and that's absolutely fine. Like, it's not the case that you can be a socialist and then own wage slaves. It's not that you can be a socialist and then, you know, it's like being anti-slavery but then owning slaves. It's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense.
Editor, it doesn't go to me, so help out a poor editor if you want to watch it. It's like, I called it, like, you know, takedown of Vaush. It was brigaded by his community, so it has a lot of dislikes. But I basically break perspective philosophies in that video. We break down that discussion that I have with him, where
that's
he
nice.
basically ends up asserting a position like whether or not the Holocaust happened is just a matter of, you know, how you feel about it. And it's basically a game about power. And
wait,
but no, I understand.
Truthfully, he honestly
might be
said that
he means that it's like the victor writes the history books, but that's not what he meant.
No, he didn't mean that. He said, like, look, this is all power plays. Whether anything happens is power. When how we understand reality is power, and that's how he takes it. And it's honestly not an uncommon way of understanding reality in relation to even Marxism, right? Like, a lot of people that go like all about power in Marx on his critique of Hegel basically take institutions to be genealogically founded upon corrupt power, and so all of our knowledge claims become subsequently produced by these power structures, and so our understanding of reality is tainted by this power. And this is almost Foucauldian. And one of the issues is it leaves you in this position where your understanding of reality is there is no understanding of reality, and there is no way to kind of get yourself out of it. Now, you could say that they're right in many ways, and I think they are, and it also leads to, like, you know, the feminist takes, like, you know, like the patriarchy produced science, and therefore science is like a patriarchal manifested like understanding of reality, that kind of nonsense. And I think ultimately it's just a way of perpetuating a certain understanding of the world. It is itself a meta-narrative, and being a meta-narrative, it's produced by our institutions, it's produced by the way that we've engaged, it's produced by like philosophical discussion, which has had power influence over it, but not necessarily to the point in which it's entirely produced by those interests, by those competing wills, which is obviously the Nietzschean take. And so Nietzsche takes, you know, science to be just the expansion of Christianity, and, you know, I think Vaush takes all epistemics to be the expanse of power structures that lie beneath them, which is in relation to like the material contentions of reality. The point is, though, those material contentions, which we are understanding to be the foundation, ultimately turn out to be nonsensical if we dismiss the institutions which allow us to come to those conclusions, which is essentially the Hegelian like counterattack to the Marxist position. Thank you very much, Bryce, for your support. Thanks for showing me the answers in philosophy, made me decide to pursue it. Thank you very much. I'm genuinely happy to hear that someone's went and done philosophy because I've pointed them in that direction.
He meant literally, whether or not it happened depends on, you know, ultimately how you feel about it.
That what do you mean when you define the Holocaust? Like the actual like events that took place, or just the definite?
The actual event that occurred.
Okay, fuck. I'd have to listen to it, but I have a really hard time believing that's a really extreme position to take.
You can watch that video. Thanks, Ben Green.
Thanks, Ben Green. Do you think that Vaush and Destiny should kind of stick to the argument of effectiveness and leave ethics to the specialists like you? No, I think they should learn some ethics. Absolutely not. I don't think it's healthy or good for individuals to purely engage in like some sort of like pragmatism, because then they could be just forward in a perverse philosophy. If they don't understand the foundations of their positions and then they forward them anyway with such like, you know, political might behind them as influencers, then they could end up mobilizing people on false information, and it would just be the same as like, you know, the kind of capital, you know, the Capitol rioters, you know, the people that broke into, you know, the Trump supporters that broke into the Capitol building, like the storm in the Capitol, that's the one I was looking for. It would be kind of like that, like people who are more motivated in relation to a perverse understanding of reality to take action by those influencers who have no relationship to truth and on grounding their claims, but are getting people to act regardless. And that's like what Trump did. And this is the dangers of aesthetics. This is the true danger of aesthetics, and the reason why we so badly need realism.
And that's why perspective philosophy talked to him 2 days ago. Mm-hmm. And he pushed him on this, and he doubled down on it.
He doubled down on it.
But that just naturally follows from epistemic anti-realism.
It tripled down on
that. That is a natural consequence.
Yeah, I guess. It just seems like such a...
no objective system of knowledge, then yeah, if you are a non-cognitivist or an expressivist about knowledge and truth, then it naturally follows that whether or not an event happened in the world, what we want to consider an objective fact in the world, does literally flow from how you feel about it. And people will say that, oh, well, that's so uncharitable. I mean, literally watch the video, watch the discussion he had with perspective philosophy. If you think it's uncharitable, I mean, that just sort of proves my point, because that's how absurd the position is. But
I think if anyone's
that's what follows from it.
The worst,
push him, because I pros,
the worst part of
companions and guilt argument to him.
The worst part of it is how uncharitable Vaush was in that discussion. Like, imagine someone trying to say like, "Oh, it's uncharitable to like take his position in like this," when it's like the guy is the least charitable person I've ever, like, well, not the least. I mean, I have had some pretty spicy conversations, but like, he's one of the least charitable people I've ever spoke to. So like, in terms of like, you know, being charitable, he's not doing like, we're being more courteous to him, I think, in representing him in a way which he himself condones numerous times than the way that he represents us. And like, for example, I know Rem is a moral realist as well, and he called we're snobby and deluded. So in reality, I don't think anyone's being uncharitable here except for Vaush.
Which basically says, you know, if you don't believe there's any ought claims that have a definitive truth value, what we ought to do just depends on how someone feels about something. I then extend that to theories of truth and knowledge. Why ought I choose this theory of truth? Why ought I choose this theory of knowledge? Why ought I consider this true or this false? And again, he says, well, it's the same thing. It works the same way as it works in the moral case. It's all dependent on how you feel about it. Truth claims, knowledge claims are dependent upon your expressions and feelings, or they're about power. Whoever's in power determines it. So it becomes this relativistic notion. And he just doubles down on that. I understand people like, oh, you couldn't possibly think that. Just watch what he said. It's, you know.
Yeah, it's hard, like, because I want to be charitable, but then, like, I'll watch him do it. So, like, I started the video I was watching today. He was very clearly saying, like, I don't believe in this particular thing. Like, I would never say this, but it's something that I listened to him say, like, verbatim. And then he'll argue around it in a way that's consistent with what he's opposing now. So, like, this is, and I still don't know what he thinks about this in terms of, like, do you think it's ethical or even good to propagate misinformation if it, like, furthers your cause? Because It seems like he is very stringently.
I 100% think he takes that, and he's not the actually only one that takes that in terms of Marxism, right? Like, I mean, propaganda was a big thing promoted by early communists, like the use of propaganda, and think in relation to like counter propaganda, and they just see the masses as kind of mindless, uneducated, indoctrinated individuals, and that's why they need the vanguard movement. And that's something that I think Vaush 100% engages in, this idea of vanguardism, the idea of being a representative, the intellectual, like I can't say it, intelligia, like the intellectual class which represents the interests of the populace, while the rest of the populace just do as they're told. And I think that's 100% the position he takes. It's even in the way that he advocates for revolution, he takes a very traditional communist approach.
Defend that point of view, but then when he talks about it in detail, like, well, I don't actually believe that. I'm not sure what he thinks about it. I don't know. I just don't know. I feel like he thinks it's okay because, like, he talks around it in a way that it feels like, yeah, you truly do believe this. Like when we brought up the Breonna Taylor stuff, and I said, like, well, a lot of people lie about whether or not she was, like, killed in bed or not, and he's like, well, does that even matter so long as, like, the end story is the same? I was like, well, yeah, one thing happened and one thing didn't. But it seemed like he was, like, very confident in that he didn't care what the facts of the case were. So yeah, I was kind of confused about that.
No, but like it all, yeah. I mean, the explanation is just that he only cares about what's going to benefit him. That's why he says, if you disagree with me and I can't convince you otherwise, then I might as well just kill you. I mean, that is something he literally says. I don't understand how people can then be like, oh, well, you know, he doesn't actually. I mean,
yeah, because when I asked him,
thank you, Magnus. My God, yeah, like 100%, he does take that position, and it's ridiculous to even hear someone take the position that, look, all that matters is power, and it's like, look, you even those understandings of power dynamics beyond an intuitional level are based on even on an intuitional level. Are based upon a meta-narrative, or based upon an understanding of reality, which is essentially the Marxist position. Otherwise, you know what, his version of right and wrong is going to come from his, like, sadomasochistic relationship with other individuals, which means, like, if he feels like he's being cooked by other people, if he feels like he's being attacked by other people in terms of his authenticity, then he is going to express something that's going to be incredibly malicious and hurtful. And if he manages to, you know, motivate other people to follow him, then he's a dangerous cult leader, you know.
about, because I asked him about like establishing the facts of the matter, and I'm like, well, my goal when I disseminate
review the James Aspie crypto drama. Yeah, absolutely will, man. I didn't know there was a drama going on there. And also, like, nice to see here, Vegan Foot Soldier represent. We need to have a debate as well.
Information is make sure that I'm truthful. That's like paramount. That's one of the most important things to me. And he said, oh, well, my goal is stopping fascism. It's like, oh, well, that's...
Yeah, exactly. If that's what you're, but you know,
but his goal isn't stopping fascism. His goal, like, ultimately could lead to another kind of fascism, right? Because it's it's reactive. It's based upon like a vanguard understanding of reality, like value, truth, and the understanding of reality are coming from a certain class of individuals, which then lead individuals to a certain goal. Like, if at the very least, he's going to produce something more akin to the USSR. Like, he's not going to produce anything that's in any way, shape, or form good for socialism.
Follows naturally from epistemic anti-realism. If that is what you feel good about, and that's what you want your end to be, and there's no objective end in life, there's no thing that we ought to pursue that is objectively good in itself, then it naturally follows that any hypothetical thing that you ever you can dream up can be a legitimate end. And for him, that is pursuing like socialism. But equally well, I mean, this is why, I mean, Perspective Philosophy said this. He said he's basically like a Nazi. And I pushed back. I said, well, no, he isn't a Nazi. He doesn't hold Nazi beliefs. But he is, in a sense, just as justified as a Nazi within his own system.
I don't think I said he was like a Nazi. I'm not trying to remember back. I said, like, I think that he holds like that, like there is no difference in terms of justification between him and the Nazis. I don't think I said he was like a Nazi.
I mean, certainly within his own system, because he's a self-proclaimed like moral anti-realist. I mean, I think you also are, but you are willing to bite that. But he then takes it to the extreme and brings it to truth and to objective knowledge.
I might have related it to propaganda and Nazi propaganda. I don't remember saying that he was like a Nazi, but like obviously in terms of like his overall ability to produce a society which is, you know, self-ordained and seen in terms of being good, then yeah, that's exactly what he's going to do. I'd probably say he's going to produce something more like the USSR than Nazi Germany, though.
All dependent on how you feel about it. And I mean, this just naturally flows from the fact that, like, you know, he doesn't take the time to do any sort of education on the topic. I mean, fuck, just, I mean, and, you know, people undoubtedly call me gatekeeping again, but I mean, I've been talking about this for years now, that these streamers who, like, fuck, how many people watch his streams now?
Like over 10,000, I think, when he was doing his streams.
Yeah, he's having a huge effect on the people watching him.
10,000 people in fucking streams, man. I've got 68 here, and like he's given some philosophical advice and calling philosophers deluded, and yet he's done no real work in philosophy. Like he's never actually just grounded his positions.
People have linked me to a subreddit.
It is dangerous.
They're literally top-ready comments saying, "Oh, well, morality doesn't matter." Yeah. Like it's convenient when you were talking about the Rittenhouse stuff. All of a sudden, the law is what matters here. It's the law that matters. Morality is just, you know, it's total bullshit. It's all about the law. Suddenly, what is correct in the law is now.
But then, like the thing is, I agree that lawfulness is important, and I can understand why people would take the law. But like, if we understand that all that matters is our like fight over who controls the laws and codifications of society, and all that's based upon is whatever we feel like, then we are going to end up in some pretty deep shit when the people writing these codes and laws exempt themselves from responsibility, which is exactly what happens in society today, which is exactly what would have to happen in terms of respecting certain power structures. You're going to end up with sadomasochistic laws that are persecuting some classes of people and laws that are self-deprecating to some classes of people. You know, you're going to get the mixture of like the racist who's racist laws against black people, and then white guilt laws against, like, you know, where people like self-depreciate and try to harm their own ends. And these are the kind of like things that would come from a subjectivist position. What we need is a genuine, objective view of reality. Step back, understand what should be the case, what should be the law, why it must be the law, produce those laws, and then, you know, enforce them in a way which is rational and justified. That's what we need to do. Not produce like codifications and codified structures which ultimately politically pursue certain ends and crucify the opposition. I mean, this is literally, if I'm honest, the infighting produced by markets which have divorced people of any grounding other than the aesthetics that they purchase within this fucking capitalist system. All this is, if I'm honest, is Vaush is representing an aesthetic ideal of socialism within a capitalist class. And it's ironic that he is perpetuating this as something, you know, revolutionary, when in reality it is the very thing which would prevent any real form of ideological revolution.
now what matters.
Well, I guess technically that is consistent, right? Because it'd be consistent with an episode I get to realize.
Like, exactly, right?
One of the things that frustrates me the most, and actually, so maybe actually Vaush is the big brain the whole time, and I'm just misunderstanding. Because I would never assume somebody would have that position in earnest, because like people always fixate on my obsession with like consistency, but like I find that kind of strange because if you don't have like any consistent way of talking about something, you basically have nothing. You necessarily become absurd, in my opinion.
If I am Vaush, I say, well, why does consistency matter?
And he actually just fucking removed consistency in our discussion. Like, he totally went against consistency. Like, he was just like, right, oh well, not only does consistency not matter, right, but he's like, I am being consistent to my interpretation, which is always my interpretation, and it doesn't matter whether it's actually, you know, being held to a standard or not in terms of being like the same thing throughout this conversation. So if he thought that the sky was blue at one point in the conversation and the sky was pink at the end of the conversation, he would have said that he was being he genuinely took this position as well, that he was being consistent throughout that conversation because of his interpretation being the grounding of his beliefs.
Consistency helped me reach my end? No.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly his argument. He's like, well, would I want a Nazi to be consistent? I'm like, well, and he's like, well, yeah, so maybe if they're inconsistent, like, it's better for me, so I don't necessarily care if people are consistent or not. I just want them to do actions to serve my end. And I'm like, that's okay. That's very interesting. It feels like you lose a lot by making that sacrifice. Like, I think we can like convince people not to be Nazis rather than to say there's literally no way to know anything about anything or make any.
And the worst part is that now you've got nothing to argue against the Nazis. It's like, right, well, this aesthetic ideal seems the best for me. You know what I mean? It's so bad. It's so unbelievably bad.
Meaningful statement about anything ever, but.
Yeah, I mean, so it naturally, like, not only does he think that truth just becomes something relative, but like rules of inference itself, like modus ponens, you know, if
all of it becomes arbitrary, right? Yeah, like
all of it's arbitrary. You can choose whatever fucking logical rules of inference that you want. You can choose any of them. I mean, he literally said whether or not 2 + 2 = 4 is a matter of power.
Yeah, and he said the same thing about logic in our discussion. Like, he said that logic itself was just like was just our understanding of logic.
It is not a matter of objective fact. And I mean, he's not doing some like intuitionist appeal to like some different logical system. He thinks that mathematical statements are just dependent on.
Oh, thank you for your donation. Even as someone who enjoys Max Stirner's philosophy, Vaush's conception of power is completely nonsensical. Found you through YouTube recommendations and enjoy the channel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Stirner. Yeah, like he takes power like to a whole new level. Like it's beyond even like it's beyond the Nietzschean almost. Like. Well, maybe the Nietzschean conception of power, like the proper like end of the genealogy, maybe like really bad.
You know, I don't know if you've had any engagement with this while studying philosophy. I've had two people. One was a scientific researcher, and another guy was a historian, and they both actually pushed back so hard against. They get really triggered. The historian guy especially gets really triggered whenever people use the term history is written by the victors. And his response, basically, he wrote me this whole thing. He's like, well, actually, history is written by historians, and you know there may be some bias in some areas, but there are like lots of people that largely do their best to preserve good data, which was interesting because I never figured that out before. I never really thought about it before. But like one of the big examples I had was like during the Soviet Union, there was a lot of like suppression of information, and there was a lot of kind of like cooking the books on certain things. But there are a lot of scientists individually that were like, hey, this is important, it needs to be preserved, and there were people actively working like as individuals against the systems to preserve data.
Yeah, and even in the times of like the Soviet Union, when people realized that there was a lot of misinformation, that understanding of it being misinformation modified how they would read the information anyway. So when you understand that there has been a power structure which has been manipulating the scenario, and you say like, look, history was written by the victors, you go, wait a minute, wasn't this history written by the victors? Well, I'm definitely going to see if there's any evidence on the opposite side to see whether this is actually the case, and see if I can search out any contradictory sources. And I'm going to now go to a greater extent to disprove this position in relation to the power, just to see if to balance out and make this more fair. So like it 100% even changes your disposition and how you engage with history when you understand the power dynamics. It shouldn't eliminate truth as a whole. It should inform you as to how to gain truth to a greater degree.
That later ended up being important, which I thought was interesting. I guess kind of pushes back a little on that notion that like, oh well, history is whatever the leading superpower says history is.
Well, I mean, like, so I agree to an extent on certain topics, but like on science, for example, it was written by the victors because it was written by the scientists of the day, right? Or like in topics of like indigenous history, you know, indigenous history was largely written by Jesuits and missionaries who came overseas and documented their firsthand accounts. And, you know, their primary interest was, you know, evangelizing these new primitives who they deemed to be savages. So they leave out these, you know, very important cultural distinctions that exist.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Now with the process of modern. So
I'm definitely sure that process of selectively passing information, I think that definitely happens. But then also on the other hand, our process of uncovering those things is still a process being done by the victors as well, kind of, right? Like hopefully.
Well, yes, there's a correction. There's a natural correction that is going to occur as you recognize the past mistakes. So now we are able to.
But then if you take that position, why are you scientific anti-realist, man? Like, Unless you're saying that like science is just not real yet, which is fine, which is like that's just saying that it's like it's just hasn't removed relevant falsehood, which is like a Gettier kind of like clause, isn't it?
Right. Very scholarly studies of stuff in the history of science or in the history. You bring in different pedagogical techniques in indigenous history. You consult actual elders, whatever field you're talking about. So it improves. But there is still that history that has existed. Something actually did happen. It is a matter of fact what happened. The world does not actually change. The past does not change depending on who's in power.
Yeah, this is very, very strange. That like the idea that, and I think there are some like obscure forms of.
And this is like a separation between metaphysics. I mean, and I would go so far as to say, look, he's a metaphysical anti-realist. It's not just about knowledge. I don't think he believes in metaphysics, as in a metaphysical foundation of reality. I don't think he does, beyond the point of appearances, which is a very postmodernist take. And I think that's not surprising because he did study sociology, and I did have a go at about that. Maybe a little bit spicily in my debate, but I think this is a very typical position of sociologists.
I don't know, metaphysics or whatever, that like when you close a door, if a sentient creature isn't perceiving something, it ceases to exist or something like that. But I think ordinarily that seems to be a pretty silly position.
Oh, did he say it was, but he isn't now? Okay, right, that's fair.
I'm like sympathetic, towards the idea that language structures our world. But
I misheard.
Never
sorry,
for a second
thanks,
suggest
Leo.
that the actual external world as it really
Well, sorry about that, Rem. Didn't mean to misrepresent you.
Exist
is
something that just especially depend on something honestly as arbitrary as power. That like at least on feelings it sort of makes sense, because if we look at the actual way that we seem to approach the world, I mean our emotions and how we feel about it seem to have a tangible effect. But like if there are two people on an island, I mean like it just seems so arbitrary, power as this thing that dominates all knowledge.
Sure.
It just seems like empirically wrong about the way that we experience the world. But again, like this doesn't surprise me. This is what I've.
But it's not like I mean empirically wrong. Like I mean that's a very that's a very like loaded term. But I think he means like demonstrably. Like I think it'd be charitable there, maybe a bit like spicy.
It's thought to be the case about Vaush for a long time, and it's why I wish people would. But I don't know how you really saw. Like he basically runs, I feel like a cult. Like the people who follow him are a cult and are not going to.
Yeah, but unfortunately, you can argue maybe that most online content creators have a similar.
But I would even say that, like, I think I probably would have said the same about you, but it seems like every 6 months or so you run a fucking gulag and siphon off 50% of your audience. Yeah. Every 6 months. So I don't know if it would. There are definitely people who are.
Some communities hold their creators more responsible than other communities for sure. Just depends on the type of try to build.
Yeah. Like, and I think like look, there is a point in terms of aestheticism in which we may be able to be open to the critique that look, all content creators have a certain aesthetic appeal, have a certain a relationship with their audience, and I think that is definitely a position that you can take. But I think that Vaush really does represent a divisive position. It's not just that he's representing a certain aesthetic, it's that he's trying to express an understanding of reality to motivate people to action all the time. And usually that action is in relation to being anti something else. So in other words, he's bad faith. He is the negative. So everything that he does is always against whatever the fascists are quote unquote are doing, or the Republicans are doing. And so he's running a reactive cult, and it's very dangerous. It is very dangerous. It's essentially what would lead to something like storming the Capitol, because they were reactive. They thought they were fighting to defend the homeland, and this is essentially the foundation of political dogmatism and putches, really.
Yeah. But I mean, it's worse with Vaush, I think, because I think he's also just a bad person, and I wanted to bring this up on stream, and I do want to call him out on this because I brought this up many times before, because he has made very vicious ableist attacks towards me, and I've tweeted. You can go on my Twitter and look at this, and I am calling him out on this because this is the consequence of having a moral system like his, is he's able to justify doing horrible shit to people because it's just convenient, for his brand or for pursuing socialism or whatnot. I mean, the attack that he gave was like a year ago, and I guess it was a year ago, and we are very forgiving with Vaush for things that he did, 2 years ago. So maybe this is just another case of where we just have to, forgive him this time, but. It's and it might be considered petty, but at the same time, this has a direct effect on his audience. I mean, people look up to him, people respect him, people see him as a leader, people will see him as a role model. And if this is someone who has,
and I don't even think he accepts himself doing wrong. I think that he just says, like, even when he says I did wrong, it's in a way to just manipulate the scenario. Like he's even his apologies are bad faith, I think.
A moral system that is completely arbitrary, pulled out of his ass, and he is actively doing harmful things. This is going to influence the people that are watching his content, and I think that is genuinely dangerous. I think from anyone's perspective. And again, I don't really know what the solution is.
From anyone's perspective,
here and try to call him out on
everyone's perspective, guys.
I think that, like,
please subscribe.
this is going to sound like I'm very full of myself, but I think that he does watch a lot of my stuff. So I guess like what I imagine is probably going to happen is if he gets enough pushback on this, is he's probably going to stop talking about this for a while. And he like unfollowed my friend on Twitter again and everything. So he's probably going to like stop talking about this for a while and not mention it. And then like in 3 months when he talks about it in the future, he's like mysteriously just going to have the exact same view as me. That's my guess of what's going to happen. So hopefully I guess like it's already kind of started that.
Well, he kind of already's done that. Like, to be entirely honest with you, he always even through his conversation with Destiny, he slowly just started moving towards the position with Destiny. And then by the end of it, he was basically agreeing. He's like, well, we'll basically agree on this. Like, I don't understand why you're like even doing this. And it was like, whoa, you did not start with that position. You did not even nearly start. You can't go from like saying like, oh, well, wait a minute. Like an individual needs to like act a certain way within capitalism and otherwise that's wrong. From the start, it's like, well, actually, it's totally morally neutral. Maximize your freedom. We should only be criticizing institutions. Like, the position massively changed. It was an absolute jump, but he justified that in our conversation with, I didn't change my position because it's all about my interpretation of my position, and I was consistent to it in the sense I was always the one interpreting it. And it's like, right, so you literally like doubled down on the subjectivism, like there is no such thing as truth. I was consistent because I say so. You know what I mean? In our discussion, that's what he said. I mean, like, it's like what the, I mean, like I'm paraphrasing, mind. To be charitable, process. Like to be fair,
because that seems to have happened quite a bit in the past. So, yeah.
I mean, he doesn't respond to like legitimate criticism, like that are actually, I think, in good faith. Like I posted very detailed. Like he won't apologize for his actions ever. I mean, fuck, it took him however fucking like 6 months for him to apologize publicly for sexually harassing someone who's disabled. No, seriously, it took him 6 fucking months of me pestering him on Twitter before he gave a public apology. 6 fucking months. Like that is crazy to me, and he still hasn't apologized to me for for making these ableist attacks on me. So I don't expect him to change. I mean, I try to give him the benefit of the doubt, and in my mind, I'm like, because I'm also a socialist, right? So praxis. Everyone's like practice. We just have
praxis is on Twitter, my dude.
Yeah, exactly. We just have to embrace it. People have different methods for bringing people over to the left. Maybe he's converting people on the right, but continually he makes
that's bullshit, right? No, 100% bullshit, right? Like there are toxicities in our very own ideologies, and if we don't have that internal critique to stop the dogmatism from perpetuating itself and appealing to the masses, then we have a movement which is what would be the right word to use? We have a, I'm trying to think of what Alistair McIntyre, what word he uses. It's not a tradition. Actually, it might be tradition, but we would have a tradition essentially, which ultimately perpetuated its own demise because its dogmatism would be so easily critiqued from outside sources that we would be seen as idiots, fools, the indoctrinated. And so you would end up with right-wingers just basically dominating the scene as they make us look essentially like ridiculous, or not only just make us look ridiculous, but actually show that we are being ridiculous, which is far worse. And even if we succeed, then all we have done is perpetuated a ridiculous notion, which ultimately leads to greater suffering. And so, yeah, 100%, we need to remove this kind of dogmatism from through internal critique in relation to this tradition. And look, it's not a bad thing to say like there are right ways and wrong ways of doing something. It's like, look, don't go out and punch a Nazi. I criticized Philosophy Tube. I almost called them Left Tube. Philosophy Tube for that. Because at the end of the day, look, it's not a good thing to go and start in fights. And then all you're doing is perpetuating more hatred and violence and division, and it's only going to make things worse. And overall, you aren't justified for doing it anyway. So we definitely need to think about how we are genuinely engaging with people and make sure that we do it in the best possible way and remove as much dogmatism and like falsity from our traditions as possible.
Makes the left look bad by engaging in anti-intellectualism, engaging in poor decisions, and then fucking having these absolutely garbage tier philosophical. And he's never read anything on it. And that's probably the thing that annoys me the most is the fact that he has the time now to sit, engage with these questions that he's dealing with, pick up an intro to philosophy. He has the time to do that. He has the time and the money to be able to do that right now. But I don't know if he's just too lazy.
I think what's annoying is that you don't even need that much time and money. You can just sit and watch a YouTube video on some of these topics, man. Like YouTube is like such a vestitude of information. There's so much information here. It's just like available to you, but he chooses not to look at it and yet claims intellectual superiority above all of his interlocutors interlocutors, essentially, in order to, bolster his position, and then justifies it with, I'm fighting the Nazis. And it's like, you aren't fighting the Nazis. There hasn't been real fucking Nazis for a long time. Fascism right now is more akin to your position, since you're being an intellectual fascist, leading people down a rabbit hole and justifying it through power, right? It's honestly sickening.
Oh no. I mean, if he can watch audiobooks or listen to audiobooks, he can watch lecture streams on it, but he's shown no effort to actually engaging with the material, and that always bothers me. I mean, you have people come on. I criticize you for this as well. I mean, at least you read Bertrand Russell, right? Yeah. So at least you did something. But it's just, I don't know what the solution is here for it. It's yeah, I don't know. I mean,
thanks for the donation, Ben. Hi, bro. Before I go to bed, I really need to say the reason you really don't get Vaush's lunacy because you didn't watch his 5th video on how to trigger reactionaries. Please watch. It's like 5 minutes. Sun Tzu lives. I'll give it a watch. We'll see what it's like.
I was wondering before I came on. I was
Good night,
expecting him to. I was half expecting him to join the voice call like he did last time to come on and defend himself. But
I think he's actually kind of bothered by this most recent shit. So
yeah, I think because I think he knows that he's really fucked up and exposed himself. I don't think there's any way for him to actually defend himself on these grounds. I can't imagine anything that he could say that would like. I can't.
No, I agree, and this is part of like, and everybody says I'm too harsh in the conversation. This was part of why my conversation felt so unreal with him, because like, and people get mad at me for using rape analogies and stuff all the time, but like people, like the implications of what he was saying were truly unbelievable to me. Like at the level is like, I don't believe that you actually could possibly do this. Like the idea that it's morally permissible to do something if someone else was going to do it anyway, like no way does any normal non-sociopathic human being believe this. This is an insane statement.
Get mad at you for that, for giving examples?
Well, yeah, because the analogy that I really wanted to give, because like we can get the heart of it real quick. Like let's say you go into
like, when did you become a deontologist? And I was like, look, well, when did, like I said to him, I was like, why do you deny personal moral responsibility? And he's like, I don't. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, and he says it's morally neutral because there's no negative utility, but it's like, it's not morally neutral if you as a utilitarian have deemed the system and the status quo to be morally deficit. So if you perpetuate that and continue it, then you are, continuing that moral deficit. So it's not morally neutral. Like, that's unbelievably clear. Like, I don't understand how anyone can take such a, like, how anyone could be that bad at philosophy, to be entirely honest with you. I really feel like I wouldn't have made those claims when I was like an A-level student, and I was studying, and I only just got introduced to utilitarianism. It's like the worst take of utilitarianism I've ever heard.
Some fucking restaurant, and there's a girl, and the requirement of the restaurant is one time a day, like a customer rapes her. If someone else is gonna rape her, can you just do it anyway and it's okay? Like, and the obvious answer is like, well, no, what the fuck, that's horrible. But like
people should read just basic like intro bioethics papers.
Sure,
it gets worse than that.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
This is the whole point. You're supposed to take it to the extreme.
Yeah, just to see if you believe it's in the actual concept. Yeah, instead of like these really dumb, like weaker examples. Because like, if you believe it, like then just own the hypothetical. Like then say, yeah, sure. But like, yeah, like the
idea that just because someone
would have done something anyway, it's moral for you to do it. Yeah.
I wonder what he thinks about Canada.
But like, like to be charitable to Vaush as much as he's not charitable to anyone else, is he was saying that if it was institutionalized and so that it would be the norm and the perpetuated by the power structures of that society, that somebody else would come in, and the likelihood of someone coming in and doing it anyway. But then I was like, what I was trying to show is that look, it is the norm because people are doing it, which means that there is a level of personal responsibility in terms of group collective action which we need to take responsibility for. So when we engage in that norm and perpetuate the status quo, we are ultimately fulfilling the mandate of the system, which is essentially moving through its occupants, moving through the people who are, essentially performing these actions. Even if the ideology says it's okay, if you know the ideology is false and you perpetuate that behavior, I would say that it's worse, because I'm not a consequentialist alone. I actually understand moral reasons and the impact of intentions, even in terms of consequence, which is why I told them to read Henry Sedgwick. But even if we dismiss all of that, there is a level of just a misunderstanding of how power works, even, and which is so ironic because of the position he's taking is entirely based upon a conception of power. One of the things I actually really love studying is power, and I'm very much into like Foucault and like Machiavelli. The positions which try to express like how power functions, what is the most motivating, those kinds of like philosophical takes. And it seems that for someone who takes a very postmodern, almost postmodern from the sense of being the end of Marxism, take, he has no real conception of how power works in society, which is so weird.
Or creating creating military equipment and selling it to Saudi Arabia that's then used in the Yemeni war, because that's actually Trudeau's justification.
But the U.S. would do it anyway?
Saying, yeah, someone else is going to build it anyway, so why don't we? And we get the jobs. So is he saying that he supports imperialism by Canada in constructing military armaments that are then used to kill Yemeni children? That'd be a very interesting thing to commit yourself to. But I guess if that's what his moral position is, then so be it.
That just seems unreal to me. Like, and this is why I'm saying that it's like, I feel like, because I try to be charitable. I feel like he doesn't actually believe it, but maybe he's kind of got like caught up in the argument. But then like every time he has a chance on like another show or another platform to like walk it back or to like rephrase it a little bit, it seems like he just kind of doubles or triples down. And then we end up in areas where I can't truly believe that somebody actually thinks that. That's just insane to say. But
oh yeah, I don't think he believes it. I don't actually genuinely.
I don't know now. I'm not sure.
I don't think anyone is a genuine epistemic anti-realist.
Oh no, I think he believes it. Like I absolutely do think he believes it. Like I don't think he's. I think he's 100% like on board with it. I think that it's a sociological take, man. It genuinely is.
Well, nobody lives their lives that way, right?
When they can't justify their positions.
Yeah.
Because the easiest thing to do in a position is just to completely double down on everything. Epistemic anti-realism is to just bite the bullet on every single argument ever.
And you know what? This is to trigger the fuck out of you. This is why the way that my approach to life is I just assume that anytime you have these contradictions in people's systems and they try to appeal to other systems, what's really happening is they're just egoists and they don't want to admit it. I think at the end of the day, everything becomes self-serving. We try to find like other logical systems to obfuscate that, but then when they fail, we say, well, we don't care about logic anymore. But I think like the consistent approach is just like, oh, like somebody will do something that benefits them or satisfies them, and that's basically like extended for everything.
Egoism is still a form of moral cognitivism. It is still like egoism is like, look, I don't like egoism, right? I think egoism is garbage, and we've discussed that before. But this is so beyond egoism. That, like,
well, but that's the thing. Is like,
yeah, but he does relate it to egoism, and an understanding of ego, which is, I think, almost, I think as well. Like, I don't even think it relates to his own understanding of self. I have no idea how he would even understand himself in this, because he takes like an existentialist position. So I don't know how he would argue for his egoistical takes, but he does take a level of egoism and tries to justify it through that. And I think that he's just it does exactly the same thing as what sociology does, man. And this is, when I studied sociology like a little bit, this is what I noticed a lot of within sociology. Sociology just starts talking about varieties of different philosophical, scientific, psychological theories, and then just sort of sandwiches them together to try and explain certain socio-political phenomena without any real grounding. Even though they're contradictory, it doesn't matter, because ultimately it's just an expression of what's going on and attempting to explain it. And I think that's honestly what sociology does a lot of the time. And I think that's what Vaush does really as a sociologist. He tries to express the way things are going on by using any theory which would explain that, even if it contradicts another theory he was using to explain something else.
I don't know if he's actually non-cognitivist or if that just is because he can't reconcile the current differences. So it's easier to say I don't believe in logic rather than to say I'm irrational.
He refuses to engage at all with the material, so he just speaks out his...
Yeah, I actually agree that Vaush seemed like kind of like a narcissist in the talk. I absolutely agree. And I don't mean that lightly. I mean that like genuinely narcissistic. It's hard to say it, because it could just have been like a rhetorical kind of tool, and he might act like this in his day-to-day life, you know what I mean? It could be a character, but then the character of Vaush, in terms of like how he approaches reality, is very almost narcissistic, and that would explain like his focus on power so much, right? And ultimately, I would even say that it's like a self-fulfilling thing, that when you take this sort of egoistical, power-orientated approach, it causes you to lose grip with reality and fall into narcissism. And narcissism is a loss of understanding of reality. It is a break from reality and a movement towards relationships with others as sadomasochistic political agenda. And so when you end up engaging with others, you're doing so to a forward an end which you have subscribed to without considering them and their ends. And as soon as you do that, then you fell into you're using someone as a means of validation and so on like that. So I think ultimately, I don't know, man. Like, I don't want to psychoanalyze Vaush totally, but I do think that the way he approaches this scenario is, if not narcissist, would lead to narcissism. Do you know what I mean?
He's an anti-vaxxer about these types of things. He refuses to give any sort of effort to reading on any of these issues because, I don't know what it is. He's either lazy or he's just incompetent at doing it. And if he's so incompetent that he can't do the basic research to determine whether his positions lead him to these crazy fucking conclusions, then you should not be a content creator with tens of thousands of people watching you.
Or just don't talk about morality.
Or just don't talk about. I mean, I disagree. I think anyone who talks about politics should be basically informed on this, But yeah,
I agree. Yeah, like absolutely, Rem. Bring home the Enlightenment. The idea like of talking about politics, but then not having an ethical foundation for that conversation is just absolutely baffling. Like, as if you can talk about our responsibilities, our governmental responsibilities and political and social cultural responsibility without having a grip of what responsibility on in an individual level means, and the foundations of the values from which we would perpetuate certain institutions. Politics has always and always will be a forwarding of ethics, an expansion upon ethics.
especially when he literally will talk about morality on stream. It's a common issue on Twitch. I mean,
sure. That was why I was trying to go away from the morality, especially because he has the like I remember being in high school when I tried to like think morality. Like he has like the very 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 naive understanding of consequentialism, like or like you feel like that very basic like, well, if I have to do a whole bunch of bad things, as long as one good thing comes out of it, it's worth it. And it's like, oh, like it's so short sighted. Like, yeah.
I mean, he comes up with it in real time. Right?
Yeah, that's something I noticed.
He doesn't put any effort or thought into it. He pulls it out of his ass when it's convenient. Whatever's going to justify him winning the debate, that is ultimately what is going to be convenient for him at the end of the day. But I think that's what a ton of people do. It just so happens that because like the solution here is to just go, you know what, you've given me some serious consideration. I'm going to look into this a bit.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I don't mind. I don't think it's bad. Like, there are times where people will, especially over my self-defense, like, there are times where people will challenge me. Like, sometimes we'll get down to an area and it's like, I haven't thought about this before. Like, I'll give you some answers. I'll think about it. I honestly don't know. I have to spend more time thinking about this. But like, rather than like trying to die on a hill that you just constructed, like, that seems like a really tall way. Like just say you don't know, like think about it for a while. There's no harm in that. Other than you look bad.
You've got to just
like I feel like because I started coming on these streams when I was 15 when I first came.
You've definitely got to just say like, I don't know sometimes, man.
On stream. No, I was 16. And I think that since then, that is something that I've learned, which is that you don't have to be correct. I mean, ultimately, everyone's going to shit on you anyway, so it doesn't matter. Just do your, be willing to acknowledge that this is something you need to do further reading on before you commit yourself to the position. But people are just not willing to do that because they're too afraid of how that's going to go. Yeah.
It becomes all about the aesthetic rather than... Oh, that happened in that conversation too. It was
really
but it's
all about the aesthetic. That actually is fundamentally the way that this society is functioning, man. We've moved, in the words of Giles... Giles Debord? Yeah, Giles Debord. We have moved from being to having to appearing, right? We used to be humans, right? We used to engage in reality and try and express some manner of authenticity within our actions. Then we became capitalist consumerists, where we wanted to have more and more, compete with other individuals in terms of having a greater accumulation of like pleasure fulfilling objects, right? And now we've moved to the final stage of appearances, where all we do is seek to impress one another and be seen with those objects which would gain the adoration of other individuals in order to fulfill our inauthentic lives, in order to give ourselves some sense of identity and meaning, because we are lost and hopeless in this nihilistic, capitalist, hedonistic mildew in which we can't find a way out. And so we kill pain on a day-to-day basis by taking photos, posting them to social media, and hoping to God that someone likes them so that we don't break down into fucking tears and off ourselves. That's the fucking foundation of this unbelievably awful society.
Fuck, what was the question? I asked him about like, he had to do like how you live your life or some charitable thing or whatever. And I asked him like, oh, like why do you do this or whatever? And then, or he asked me and I said why, and he was like, oh, like I do it for the aesthetic. And I'm like, wait, well, this isn't comparable to what I said. And he's like, oh, I don't actually mean I do it for the aesthetic. I mean, like my aesthetic is being like a good person or whatever. And I'm like, wait, hold on, like what are you talking about? Oh yeah, it was okay. It was a conversation of like, so I try to avoid like sponsors that I think are like a little like morally not okay. So, like I try to avoid like gambling sponsorships. I try to avoid like the whole CS:GO gambling thing. Like, it's generally something I don't feel okay about. So it's something I try to avoid. And then his response to me was like, oh yeah, like I try to avoid a lot of sponsors too. It's not part of my.
Project your audience to like 20 viewings of like a single Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
That's not gambling. Hey, hold on. I didn't say I avoided all.
Gambling.
What? Thank you. I didn't say I avoided all sponsors, but I try to avoid things that I like think are like morally reprehensible. Like I really don't like gambling. Something I try to avoid. I don't like the CS:GO gambling shit. And then after I said that, he was like, oh yeah, I don't take sponsors either because I think it hurts my aesthetic. And when he said that, I was like, wait, why are you comparing these two things? I don't avoid this because it hurts my aesthetic. Something I think is like morally not okay. So that's why
because that's the foundation of his morality. It's aestheticism. And like, look, this is like a very like this is what absurdism's based off, like the kind of Nietzschean aesthetic ideals.
Trying to do it. He's like, oh, well, that's what I meant actually. Like I just mean my aesthetic is like being like a good person or whatever. And I was like, wait, what? Yeah, I know. Yeah, it triggered the fuck out of me. And then he said afterwards I was trying to like trigger him or trap him when I got irritated that he did that. But whatever.
Yeah, but that's also what his supporters was. And that's like when I had that discussion with him, they say, oh, you're just misrepresenting him. You're being uncharitable.
Yeah.
No, maybe. So there's two options here. Either he does genuinely believe the views that he has, or he just doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about and he's talking out his ass.
Yeah, and that's my problem. Like, because I would like to think at least in my conversation with him, I'm making a really big effort to try to figure out what the fuck he means. And if I'm making this huge effort and I still can't figure it out, I mean, like, I don't think I'm being uncharitable. There must be some problem in communication or something here. Like you have to admit exists. You know?
Also, can I ask? Because I never caught up on this on the Rittenhouse stuff. What was his position on that? Did he think that you shouldn't be allowed to shoot back in self-defense?
I don't even know what the fuck his position was at the end of this. I'm not sure. And I don't want to say it for fear of misrepresenting him. I remember that I thought his position was insane. So I tried to like, I think at one point during the argument, because I asked, he was trying to say, so I'm going to give him like my side. So maybe if you think I'm misrepresenting, you can always look at it. Like at some point, there were multiple shootings that happened after a first shooting. And I said like, well, don't you think he has a right to defend himself here? And Vaush was like,
one shot before.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying even after the first shooting. And Vaush was like, well, the people that were chasing him, they thought they were justified in attacking him. And then my question was, well, hold on. Let's say that you believe that you're morally in the right and people are chasing you and they're going to potentially kill you or cause you serious bodily harm. Do you have a right to defend yourself? And Vaush
this is the fear, right? That he motivates individuals to action in relation to being reactionaries and like kind of creates this like hyper-vigilant fervor in terms of people being active on the street, which is I think a lot of the problems that occurred in the Black Lives Matter protests, were people being so scared of people coming out and attacking them, which is it's understandable because people did get attacked prior to some of these protests, but people were so scared of being attacked that they become hyper vigilant and so reactive and started like acting like I think many of the American police act, where they're surrounded by people who they don't know are hostile or not, they don't know if it's safe or not, and so they act in a way that's going to guarantee their safety by being overly aggressive and borderline sadistic to those individuals that they're against in order to deter attack or acting in a way that they think is self-defensive. And I think that this is genuinely the position that he is perpetuating in terms of misinformation. If he actually agrees with everything the left does without having some sort of like internal critique, then we can't go like, look, well, maybe actually we're not under like attack by everyone. Maybe that like those individuals who are guarding the stores are just politically trying to they're just maybe politically misled or something, but ultimately think they're doing the right thing. They don't want to go and shoot people and all that sort of stuff. And maybe if we just try and keep some distance from them and engage them in a kind of in a fair and just way, and then be ready to defend ourselves if something is to occur, it leads to a different scenario than like, look, that we have infiltrators everywhere ready to knife us at all or at every position. There are people with guns coming to shoot us. Everyone must fear. Fight for your liberty. Kind of like unbelievable like nonsense, which I think is what he was kind of perpetuating when he says like, look, in the Kyle Rittenhouse thing, like every action taken by those individuals was justified. And like I can't say that. Like even no matter what position you take on Kyle, you like fair enough, I'm not in the debate. Those individuals who were like running after Kyle really should have just called the police, right? That's what they should have done. They shouldn't have been chasing him down, trying to shoot him, trying to fight him, whatever. Ridiculous. Should have called the police. You want like and just a rejection of vigilantism would have done the world of good.
Very confidently was like, no, I don't think you do have a right to defend yourself. Like, that's just not okay. You have to like hope that, just pray that they don't do anything bad to you. And so the example that I ran was like, well, hold on, let's say so like there are videos of like a black guy is running, from 5 rednecks in a truck or whatever. Like, you think a black guy should just submit himself to the will of like the people chasing him? And he's like, well, yeah, I mean, that would be like the most moral thing to do. And
what?
Yeah,
that makes no sense.
Yeah, so, and that's where the meme.
Self-defense is like, if you think that's.
Oh, thank you very much, Des. I sent you an email giving you a quick summary of my views on Vaush. Keep up the good work. I'll check it out, man. Thanks. And that's absolutely ridiculous. Did you hear that? Did he genuinely say that like a black guy should submit himself to a bunch of rednecks or like a lynch mob or something? Like, that's fucking disgusting.
Like, not even that they're going to kill you. For example, you think someone's going to come and chop off your arm.
Sure.
You are completely justified in shooting them dead on the spot.
Yeah, maybe.
This is I don't understand the argument against that.
You can go back. I don't know what representatives do, but yeah, I feel like most of my takes regarding self-defense. Now, self-defense of property gets a little bit different, but we can even talk about that.
Yeah, I think I heard something about you think that you'd be justified in shooting someone if they were going to take something that you own.
Yeah, which is a bit none of the Rittenhouse stuff had anything to do with property though, so
no,
it's not even relevant.
I will say I do disagree with that, but sure. I do agree with you on when it comes to self-defense of the body. Like, absolutely, there is, and because there's some great papers on self-defense. I mean, Philippa Foot has an amazing paper on Judith Jarvis Thompson, like where examines like a string of like 10 different cases of self-defense. Mm-hmm. And even if someone, for example, like say someone's coming at you with a car and they can't stop the car, someone has put it in gear, for example, or they've been brainwashed, so they're actually innocent and their intent was not to kill you, you are still justified in killing them, right? Even if they are actually innocent. If your life is on the line, you are justified in killing them. I mean, all things being equal, like for example, if they have a cure to cancer, rule out those cases.
Sure, yeah, without getting some crazy, yeah.
You're absolutely justified in
good night, man.
And I don't understand how anyone could argue against that positive under any really coherent moral system.
Sure, yeah, I don't think anybody. Well, I don't know over the Rittenhouse. I don't know. That's a whole other thing. There's a lot of like political ideology and narratives that are kind of wrapped up on both sides, so it's hard to like figure out like, do you actually mean this or do you think this is bad? Because like the thing that was kind of irritating me was that like during that argument, I don't know how you feel about this, but like, so even if we say that maybe you shouldn't be able to defend your property, maybe I think that most people should be in agreement that it's probably okay to defend your livelihood because we can probably start to draw or extend like some amount of like bodily.
Yeah, but I mean, like, look, I would take the position in terms of like I argued this with Destiny actually. If you just want to have a look at it and talk and like just see the alternative position, I said like, look, there is a point in which you should only defend your you'd only be justified in like killing someone if you couldn't reclaim the damage done at a later date. Like, you couldn't see compensation at a later date. So like, they steal your insulin and you're a diabetic, you're gonna die. Yeah, absolutely. Like, fight back. Even kill them if necessary, because ultimately you are going to be placed in mortal danger. But if someone damages your property and you're not in any mortal danger and you can take them to court and essentially gain compensation, the state should allow for that compensation in terms of criminal damages. Insurance companies obviously should pay out if we live in capitalism, and ultimately you shouldn't risk your life and your bodily well-being as well confronting them. So yeah,
harm out of that. So for instance, let's say there's a family-owned business and you use that business to support your family forward. Without that business, like, you won't be able to afford medical, you won't be able to afford insulin for your child or something, right? Like, at that point it starts to get hazier, or the very least, like, yeah, you can probably defend your property. Do you agree with that or no?
Yeah, so like it's obviously going to be sort of a spectrum.
Sure, of course, yeah.
Like, if someone's going to take your life-saving medicine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, someone's going to rob your insulin, yeah. But like the weird thing that was running
TV, I mean, no.
Yeah, sure, I understand. Yeah. The weird thing I was running into with a lot of lefties was them saying like literally like you can never ever defend property, even if your businesses, you should just wait for the insurance to give it back or whatever, which is strange given how many people will never accept the same argument for like health insurance. But that take was really bizarre to me because I know that history is littered with examples of minorities using firearms sometimes to fight back against oppressive people. The most famous example I would give would be the LA riots when the Koreans were on top of their stores defending their stores. And the idea that it would be morally impermissible.
You do tend to see, like, in terms of like both political groups, there's always like one rule for some and one for another, and that's just a sign of like political indoctrination, isn't it? That like it's not about a universal general principles from which we should live, which is the foundation of ethics. Instead, it's about the aesthetics of those individuals who were involved. Was it the white guy or the black guy? Because I'm on the white side or the black side. What color were they wearing? Was it red or blue? Because that's the team I'm on. You know.
For them to defend themselves, or like would it have been morally permissible for the Jewish people to defend themselves during the Kristallnacht? I don't know how you pronounce it. Leading up to Nazi Germany, would that have been morally permissible for them to defend themselves? Like, that seems hard for me to believe.
Dakota Access Pipeline or Wounded Knee. I mean, cases of literal treaty. Would these same people then say that these people should be able to? What about like literally defending your land and defending your right to be like a sovereign nation? Are you then? I don't even understand.
It bothers me because I feel like that's pretty non-controversial, but because it's wrapped up in a political narrative, people all of a sudden have a much different opinion on it, which is frustrating for me. Yeah.
But but it even is a political narrative. Just for me to sit here and say, I mean, colonized nations should be able to defend themselves against colonizers. I mean, that's just a basic tenet of anti-imperialism. But these same people are then going to say that that's not true. I don't understand how you can be a socialist and simultaneously say that indigenous populations or oppressed minorities are justified. Like, what do they think about the fucking Black Panthers?
Yeah, exactly. That was another example. Because some people are like, you should never bring guns to any protest ever. It's like, wait.
Well, I actually disagree with the Black Panthers. I'm just going to say that right now.
Really? Because I feel like when we saw black people walking, even recently, not like the Black Panthers of like the 50 years ago, but like the Black Panthers or some of the black movements today that carry guns in protest. I think we usually celebrate that. Real quick, someone's saying, careful, during Kristallnacht, Jews were murdered in an attack. I know that during Kristallnacht there were Jews that were murdered in an attack, but I think the primary goal of Kristallnacht was just destruction of tons of Jewish property and not sending police forces over to defend it. I know there were Jews that were killed that night, but I think the big goal was like destruction of Jewish like businesses and property and stuff.
Yeah. I'll give probably the most extreme example that I can think of in terms of self-defense. Like when under FDR, or maybe it was Truman, they constructed a bunch of dams in the Missouri Basin that in turn caused floods that wiped out like 98% of agricultural lands of various Sioux nations. I mean, this was a case where tens of thousands of families were literally displaced from their homes and people were sent into spiraling poverty. Yeah. I truly believe that those people would have been fully justified in shooting the people who were constructing that day. Or maybe that becomes questionable because it was the Army Corps and are they contracted and obligated to? Then you get to that conflict. But like,
is it ever moral or ethical to kill an enemy soldier that lives in an authoritarian regime? That kind of question.
Or even the people that were doing it thinking that they were doing the right thing. I wouldn't say that it was you would be justified in killing them, especially if you could take action that would be non-lethal. Do I support Black Lives Matter? Like, I would probably say no because of the lack of like coordination more than anything. I like the look. I believe that we should fight against institutional racism when it does exist. I think some of the things that they point to in relation to institutional racism haven't necessarily been shown to be an expression of institutional racism, but more to do with the militarization and police brutality. In terms of like genuine institutional racism, I think that exists more in terms of the American court system, in terms of sentencing. And there wasn't as much conversation on that, which I thought would be way more beneficial to like minority groups in the United States. And then in terms of the mechanisms of how they tried to, create change, I don't think were very effective. Ultimately led to more harm than good, and even undermined themselves in terms of like creating political change. And then there was no political narrative, no legislation that they were pushing. I mean, did they not learn anything from Martin Luther King or many of the movements from that point? There was always legislation that they were trying to forward in relation to maintaining a certain level of like equality. They were trying to push forward like legislative change to go like, look, this is unjust. We need this. And in terms of police brutality, if they wanted to, embolden like use of force laws, empower the ability to take and hold officers accountable for actions which were unjustified, 100%. Like I'd be all about that. That's great. But it wasn't done. There was no real legislative calls, and that's just an issue, man. And so I guess like. It's like I don't disagree with the narrative behind it as much as I disagree with the mechanisms and the way in which they exercised the political kind of influence.
Basically, right?
Like it does become a lot more complicated.
Mm-hmm. But I will say it's very funny though that socialists, who I thought one of their biggest contentions had to do with material condition.
Why do I disagree with the Black Panthers? The methodology and their ethics. So like. Actually, that being said, like they had some pretty cool stuff, like the breakfast mornings. That was actually really smart. But like I would say, like their ethics, like the way, like they were almost like the way in which they approached the scenario was pro-violence, and I definitely disagree with that.
Are so anti-property defense when they talk about literally killing wealthy people and capital owners in order to secure their property. That's kind of funny to me. But
yeah, and saying I don't know how you reconcile this with like with the idea of like you being evicted and the whole conception of like getting rid of landlords, because. Yeah, there seems to be a lot of inconsistency here with saying that no self-defense in any case is justified, while simultaneously saying that we need to rebel and fight against the oppressors. It's just, I don't think that these are two things that you can simultaneously say. Like, do they also then think that, I think this is just a case of Vaush and other people. It became politically attractive for these people to jump on board, attacking Rittenhouse because of the Black Lives Matter protests. And then once they said that they that they think he was a horrible person, that you just have to continually double down on it.
Basically, you're committed to the opinion. Otherwise, you're basically like a white nationalist yourself.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I don't get
But
involved
that's
in
the thing, because like it was like Instagram bios, it was like Twitter, it was just like constant like It was just like, we're at war on social media. That's what it was. And it's just like, oh my God. And people actively looking for adversaries as well in order to embolden their sense of self, in order to give themselves some meaning in their lives. And so they're looking for someone to fight and hurt in order to give themselves some sort of like political identity within the group. You might as well have gone and like shot a cop as like a blood or a crip or something, you know? Like, I'm part of the gang.
Yeah, this is the whole problem with people grifting and virtue signaling on Twitter, is that you have to be exactly what everybody wants, or all of a sudden you are
a literal Nazi.
Yeah.
Which is
which is unfortunate. But with Vaush, I mean, yeah, I think it's genuinely an issue of I don't know if he's like greedy or if he's going after money or if he genuinely believes that like socialism is the correct thing. I don't know how to reconcile all of his behavior.
Well, and another problem too is that he almost turns into like a type of, I don't know if you say it's like a cards demon, maybe not necessarily, but like if somebody tells you that they are willing to lie to you to achieve some end, like that actually becomes a person that is like incompatible with your existence. Like you can't actually do anything with that person ever, right? Because like being extreme.
I like that he becomes the Cartesian demon, because I even said that in our debate. I was like, did you just take are you actually going Descartes' evil demon right now? And he's like, yes I am. And it's like, oh my fucking God. It's like, I like the idea of he is Descartes' evil demon, because that's what he becomes to it. Like, he actively undermines truth.
There was ever a point where this person thought that killing you would be beneficial to them. Like I would expect them to do it. It's like, well, holy shit, how are we even function in society with a person like that? Like that seems like very difficult.
Yeah, I don't know either. I feel like it's that's why I'm not like, that's why I guess I won't talk to him. I see absolutely zero point in ever having a conversation with him again, because I feel like I see him for what he is, and it's
the racial systemic inequality is alive and well. Wealth inequality, lack of reparations, reading, lack of education, income equality, death rate of black women. Like, look, I don't even disagree with pretty much everything you just said there, Akami. It's just whether it's racial inequality in the same sense as we would have proclaimed it like 100 years ago, or like 60 or 80 years ago, at the times of the civil rights movement. I'd say that the real difference is we are normally seeing classism, which has been historically produced by racism, like redlining and stuff. So it's racial inequality, but it's not to do with the actual race and their ability to have opportunities in relation to discrimination. It's more to do with the classism that still is perpetuated within capitalism today. And I think that, look, like if you look at like poor white kids in the same communities, they suffer the same problems. It's the same thing with like the Italian Americans and the Irish Americans and stuff. Like there's loads of stuff. So I'm like, just to have a quick response to that.
It's someone that isn't actually going to have a discussion with you in legitimate good faith. I mean, I felt like that about you for a while.
Depends on what we're arguing about, yeah.
Yeah, well, we were talking about pipelines, and I just engaged in the conversation very poorly. And as a result, and then I went on Twitter, and that really bothered me. That was the crux of that.
Sure.
But I actually think you are capable of having good faith, charitable conversations. But with someone like Vaush, I don't see any sort of attempt to actually try to figure out what is the correct position. He has already predetermined what is going to work for him, and anything that falls outside those bounds
he genuinely
he
has his position, and he's going to stick to it. Like, it's kind of like it's like what psychos do, actually, in terms of, like, I don't think he's a psycho, but it's what psychos do in terms of like the truth and stuff. Like, they'll just double down on their lies, no matter how much you disprove their lies. They're supposed to like double down on them, because as soon as they back down on their lie, then they've lost that power in that situation. So like they've got to keep saying like, no, I didn't do it, like almost. So yeah.
So he's locked into this position and he can't budge from it.
Sure.
So,
and even like, to be clear, like just because people are gonna probably what the fuck is this. I personally, I don't think that everybody has to become like a fucking philosophy master. I'm definitely not a philosophy master.
But like, I don't think that either.
Yeah. But if you're gonna start making some like incredibly outlandish claims related to like especially ethics, like I think you need to start exploring some really good justifications for those. If people could take.
Yes, my name is Lewis, the Scottish kind of British spelling that means famous warrior, Lewis.
What you're saying, to run to really scary places with them. I think that you have some responsibility there to do a lot of due diligence for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but it's sort of what I said so incoherently and ineffectively 2 years ago on stream, which is that your responsibility to engage in these topics and to do reading in basic moral philosophy scales exponentially the more impact that you have on people. So, like with Vaush, like when I first said that to him, he had like.
Well, I even said this in terms of power. Like, your power within the system is correlated to your responsibility. Like, what you ought to do is dependent upon what you can do, and so the greater amount of power you have in the system, the greater responsibility you have to change the system. And he kind of half agreed on that. Like,
I think less than 10,000 subscribers on YouTube or something, right?
Yeah.
And now look at him, and he's pulling in. He has an enormous influence. Like, he's fucking everywhere on Reddit. He just keeps popping up, and he is having an enormous. And usually, I imagine on teenagers, right? That's going to be his biggest demographic, and these are the people who are most likely to just buy in to what their favorite content creator is saying.
Yeah.
And that means that your responsibility to make sure that what you are saying is correct and true is just so fucking important. And it also, these are the same people that get mad at people like fucking Ben Shapiro and Nick. It's the same fucking thing. And that's why perspective philosophy says they are basically like a Nazi. It's because they operate under the same methods. They are not interested in reaching out to what is true and what is good. They're reaching out to what is convenient to them and their own.
Nice hearing about me.
And that is just the biggest fucking. Yeah, that's the thing that pisses me off. So
yeah.
But again, I don't know what really you do. I feel like what are you going to do about this? The people who have bought in are already bought in.
I'm trying to be more. The 2021 is like the year where I'm trying to be more rhetorically effective. So hopefully I'm doing a good job at illustrating like I'm trying to spend more time on that, like because I would kind of take for granted that like, well, this is bad, obviously. That would kind of be like the way that I would approach things. But I'm trying to be more like, well, this is bad because of these reasons, right? So I've tried to focus a lot recently on like explaining like this is why consistency is important. I had a whole breakdown of just like that sentence today of like without consistency you necessarily fall into absurdity. And for me personally, I believe that morality is downstream from epistemology. And even if you believe that morality is downstream from epistemology, you still need some sort of like consistent view of things, because if you don't have consistency, literally you can make any statement whatsoever. So I try to give like a really simple explanation. Like, this is the principle of explosion. If we allow contradiction in sets of rules, we can literally assert the positive or the negation of any statement. Like, it's just absolutely ridiculous to do this. Like, we can't do this, guys. Like, you can't have meaningful conversations happens. So I'm trying to engage in that more. Yeah.
I mean, but again, this is something that you find out by taking even watching.
But the problem is that any like look like even at that point, as soon as you start saying like words like epistemology, words like consistency, and you start talking about like not even higher level philosophy, but using philosophical terminology, you're going to lose against the guy that just memes you like a lot of the time, and they're just going to be like, well, you're a fucking joke, ha, ha, and they make someone laugh, and then they're like, haha, that guy's a joke. And that's unfortunately like how a lot of people debate, and that's how politicians debate. They don't talk facts. If they were talking facts to each other, they'd all lose because they're all full of shit. So the reality is what they do is they're like, my opponent is a Nazi, and then their opponent is, my opponent is also a Nazi. There's no genuine political discussion. They'll go like maybe like now and again they'll like kind of like point towards some sort of like legislation-ish or like some sort of aesthetic. So they'll be like, we should stop racism, we should end classism, and then they'll pick like one or two buzzwords, and then they'll be like, and my opponent is a Nazi, and then that's politics for you, because they're all sophists at the end of the day.
30-minute video on basic logic, right? You find out why consistency matters because of the principle of explosion.
Yeah.
And if you were to take even 30 minutes out of your life just to figure out what follows from the conclusions or from the arguments that you were giving, you would find this out. But these people just, I mean, it was my issue with Hassan as well.
Yeah.
I think with Hassan, I think it's, well, I don't want to be mean, but I think Vaush is more, because I don't think like Hassan is actually a bad person. I think he actually believes in what he believes, and he's just trying his best to achieve it. I don't necessarily think there's a malicious intent there, but I think at the same time, he has his domain and he doesn't want to step outside of that.
Sure.
And you know what? Fine. I don't see him making all of these moral arguments on stream, so it's not.
Yeah, he seems like, as much as he would hate being called a demagogue, I would say he's a demagogue, but at least he seems to like kind of stick pretty squarely in that domain. Like, I think Hassan does a lot of dumb shit related to news and politics, but I don't think I'm ever going to turn on Hassan's stream and hear him say something like, well, I'm a consequentialist, therefore anybody should be able to lie about anything, and as long as it serves my political end, it's okay. Like, I don't think Hassan would ever make a statement like that. I think he'd say some shit like, morality and ethics is for fucking nerds. Like, I'm just talking about whatever. Then I'd be like, okay, whatever.
He actually say, oh my god, like seriously, just read like an intro book. Like there are so easy rebuttals to this, which is like, why call? It doesn't even make sense. Just be a rule utilitarian, right? It's how is lying always permissible if it?
Well, that's kind of what I would say, because it's like the easy example that I try to give in result of this is like the very first time you've ever thought about consequential.
But I even said like, look, like I even said this sort of thing to him, like in terms of principles. Henry Sedgwick talks about how our principles matter in terms of utility, right? Like, so if we take certain principles and standards, we are going to end up having to understand whether we propagate the right principles or not in relation to how it will actually impact the outcome, which is like the kind of like enlightened utilitarian, but like, what the fuck? I mean, like, that takes like, it doesn't take 5 minutes to kind of understand that it does have like, consequential purport.
Like, oh yeah, like what if we kill one people and then we save two people? Like, that'd be awesome. And it's like, okay, that would be awesome in one off event, but like let's just think for 1 second, what would society look like? Like, you're gonna have institutions pop up of like bounty hunters murdering people for their kidneys. You're never gonna have a person go to the hospital ever again because they're always going to be murdered immediately to save another person, because that would be like what's morally righteous. Like everything would become chaos. Like, so maybe on its face this seems like a good idea, but if we think for like one step ahead, obviously this idea would be fucking horrible. Same thing with like lying is permissible to someone and like, okay, well, like let's think of this let's think like for 2 seconds and not 1 second. Like, what would happen to society that actually took place? Like, obviously things would be chaotic as fuck.
I mean, the question because there's I don't know if I'm convinced by it, but in response to this idea of like quantifying pleasure and quantifying pain, there's a paper, I think his name is Tarek, and he basically argues in a case of, like just imagine the trolley problem and you have one person on one track and 5 people on the other. His conclusion is that you should flip a coin when deciding whether you should pull the lever or not. And I mean, I'm not convinced by that. I reject that conclusion.
Wait, what is his argument? Why?
Right, well, I know, it's quite surprising. And again, I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but I think there's a grain of truth in it.
Well, I'm curious with the argument. This is literally like the fucking Joker. Like, well, if you flip a coin, it's always fair. Whatever happens. Like,
it's not the Joker. It's actually Two-Face, right? Like,
reject the conclusion. But his argument is basically if it's to sort of reject this third person view of morality and recognize that
sleeve,
from their perspective.
Gotta represent Batman.
Jim, okay? And Jim, let's say, I'm trying to think the example he gives. Like, let's say someone has a life-saving medicine. His name is Jim, and he needs to take it in order to live. And he needs to take it in its full dose. But there are another 5 people, and they take 1/5 of that dose, and they get to live. If you were to ask Jim, would you be willing to give up your dose of medicine so that these 5 other people should live? The question is, should Jim actually do that from his perspective? Are we justified in insisting that Jim gives up his medicine for the sake of these 5 other people?
Yeah, and this feels like, to use the word that Vaush has fallen in love with, this almost feels like it'd be supererogative. Fuck. Like something that would be an obligation, but it would be good for you to do, I guess. It'd be nice if you did it.
I've never heard that word before in my life.
Yeah, I think I've heard it used one time, but it's like Vaush's favorite word. Wait, shit.
Super erotic?
Supererogatory, I think. It's not supererogatory. I think it's supererogatory. No, it might be supererogatory.
That's actually. kind of a position that would be from a Hegelian position. I've actually talked about this. Like, you can't be morally obligated to self-sacrifice. You can't be ethically obligated to self-sacrifice. But then this only makes sense if you understand subjectivity and its expression in terms of freedom to be the foundation of everything. Otherwise, like, I'd say utilitarians would actually say, yes, you are obligated, which is what Peter Singer does, right? Peter Singer, like, consistent utilitarian. In my discussion with Peter Singer, I asked him, are we obligated to self-sacrifice? Like, if we are on a desert island, he's a vegan, you know, like, I don't know how much, because I've been hearing people calling him out for that, so I need to double check that sort of stuff, but he's a vegan anyway. He was in the conversation, and he was saying, like, look, killing and eating animals is wrong, but if you're on a desert island, like, yeah, like, you can kill and eat animals. And he's like, that's kind of it, right? But then I was like, right, but would you say that someone should be morally obligated to self-sacrifice? And he was like, yeah, you should self-sacrifice. He just bit the bullet. He's just like, yeah, absolutely, you should. Whether someone will or not is a different question. And that's exactly what you expect from a utilitarian, like, abstract utility. It's like, do the right thing. Always maximize utility, the greatest good for the greatest number, from some sort of ideal observer kind of position. And that was Peter Singer, because he actually understands the philosophy. Well, if you look at someone like Hegel, he would just say, like, look, you like, ethics is about action and engaging in terms of expression of desire. And since to get into ethics in the first place requires you to have the possibility of expressing your desire, if your desire is being ultimately if your life will be brought to an end, there is no chance of happiness. You are ultimately going to be castrated by this ethical regime where you won't find yourself in the universal at all, and there is no possibility, right? In principle, there is no possibility of finding yourself in the universal. You will always, like, be expected to die. Then you're in a state of tragedy. You have no reason to follow that. There is nothing that's action urging for you. And so in terms of, like, basic human, like, engagement in ethics, it, like, defeats the point, which is why when I was arguing against socialism done left, I was saying, like, look, in terms of ethics, there has to be an individual ethical component in terms of action urging behaviors, in terms of desires. We are talking about second order desires in ethics, understanding, like, how we should behave in society in relation to trying to achieve the good life, you know? We're not talking about some sort of abstract objective good that is just too lofty to be expressed in any real terms, because ultimately everyone will reject it, and they'll be right to reject it if they don't find themselves within it, because it's just a presupposed universal. It's abstract and it's unfounded.
Basically, being a good Samaritan, I think, is the...
It's super erogatory. That sounds like erotic, but super erogatory. But basically, the idea is that it's good, but it's not morally required to be done. I've never heard this before, but, like, Vaush uses it, like, a million times. Yeah.
Okay, I do. Actually, this is a term that I do. This is one of those cases where I've seen the word, like, in books and stuff, but I've never actually said it out loud. So this is actually how you say that. Okay, that is a word, but it is a bit... I don't know why he's saying it. It's not like it's a common... that's just a weird thing to say over and over again, but whatever. But yeah, in that case, do you think, like, let's say you're Jim, are you going to give up the 5? Or would you give up the dose?
I don't think. I think I would.
Yeah, Hegel does reject asceticism. Yeah, absolutely. He says it's like, I think you would take it as like stoicism, and he calls that the unhappy consciousness.
Use that expression here. I think it would be really good if you did. I don't know if I could ever have a society where I would morally. Yeah. I don't think I could have somebody morally obligated to do it. That's a tall order. I don't know if that's a fair expectation to place.
Okay, and so Tarek's argument is, well, if Jim, actually, let's say, okay, I'm Gavin, right, and Jim is my friend. And the question is, well, if Jim isn't obligated to give up his dose, and I have the dose instead, why am I obligated to give it to the 5 people when Jim isn't?
Wait, why would you be obligated to give it? Wait, what do you mean? Can you say that again?
So we have the 2 scenarios. We have the one scenario where Jim is the one who controls the dose. He either takes it himself or he gives it to 5 people.
Yep.
The second scenario is where there's now a third person, me, Gavin. I have the dose. I can either give it to Jim or give it to the 5 people. And Tarek's claim is, well, if Jim is not morally obligated to give it to the 5 people and that he can take himself, why would Gavin, myself, be obligated to give it to the 5 people instead of Jim?
Oh, I think Gavin, this seems... Yeah, I don't know. There must be a counter to it, because to me the answer obviously would be that because Gavin's not making any type of personal sacrifice.
Well, let's say, what if Jim is like my husband? Like, we can really... What is so special about that relationship that overrides...
I don't know if it's in terms of special about the... I guess maybe I'm not making a moral argument. Maybe I'm making... I might be appealing... I might literally be making an emotional argument. In my head, what I'm doing is I'm trying to consider this hypothetical. I'm actually trying to flip this around. Instead of thinking about myself, I'm trying to think about my son. So let's say that there was 1 dose of medicine I could give to my son, or 5 doses to other children. I would always give my son. Just 1,000,000%. And in terms of placing an expectation on another person, I would expect them to do the same thing. If they could run into a burning building and save either their child or 5 other children...
This is threshold deontology, in which we talk about our moral responsibilities actually existing in an institutional format in terms of normative expression. And so you have a greater responsibility for your son. It's not necessarily an emotive claim. You can genuinely have a greater responsibility for a particular person than a group of people, and that actually be good for the group. And that, again, is a Hegelian take. And if anyone wants to understand that in a better degree, check out Dean Moyer's essay deontology and consequentialism in Hegel's philosophy of right.
I would always expect them to save the 5 other children. Or I'm sorry, I would always going to save their child. I would never place the expectation on somebody like, oh, well, what you should be doing is saving the 5 other kids. But if a firefighter was running into a building, they're not like sacrificing anything by saving 1 or 5. They should always probably pick the bigger option. But I don't know if it's a moral or ethics argument or if I'm just appealing to some intuitive emotional thing there.
Well, I think what the argument's trying to get at, and this is where I think there's a grain of truth, because I reject the conclusion. I mean, I think you are morally obligated. If you are a stranger, if Jim is a stranger and the 5 people are strangers, I think you're obligated to give it to the 5 people.
Yeah, of course.
With a coin. But I think what is true is that people seem to think that everything has to be done from a purely third-person perspective, where you're just weighing these arbitrary numbers against each other, and that
exactly. It's ridiculous to take a third-person perspective. If I'm honest, I think that you cannot help but take an individualist like your perspective. But I would say, like, look, you can take like a non-abstract perspective, like what is my obligation in relation to objective ethics, and that be objective, but you are finding yourself within the objective, right? It's like kind of like second person over the shoulder, or better yet, it's actually hovering over one's own existence in terms of having self-consciousness and evaluating your system of drives in order to evaluate what is the best possible way to engage in reality given your action urging behaviors. And so it's like understanding the greatest possible expression of desire in relation to all individuals. And I think that when you take that position, you don't commit yourself to some sort of lofty abstract position which ultimately has no way or means of motivating anyone, even if it does manage to create some sort of conclusion, which I think most of the time it doesn't.
About making, it's the utilitarian calculus. But that seems to be very divorced from a lot of positions and a lot of decisions that we consider to be perfectly legitimate.
Absolutely. It's exactly the same as when people say, like, so you would sacrifice a human for an ant, or like 2 ants. Disgusting. It's like, well, no, I never said that. Like, what are you talking about? Like what are you talking about? Like why you, like, just because moral values equal doesn't mean that how we express it is equal anyway. Like, it's like if someone attacks you, they have the same moral value as you. If you defend yourself from that attacker, their value doesn't diminish because they've attacked you. They are just as valuable. They are just placing themselves into a relationship with you. That means that you are forced to maximize your safety and protect yourself at their expense. It's like the rule of double effect. You're just trying to save yourself, not hurt them. And that's like genuinely like how I think ethics works.
Legitimate, which would be, for example, Jim taking it himself. So like, if you were to press Vaush, like, I don't know, I bet Vaush would bite the bullet because that's what he always does. But if you were to ask the average...
The veil of ignorance is actually the stupidest position I think I've ever heard. Like, genuinely, I hate the veil of ignorance. I think Nozick does show why, and I think McIntyre does it even better. It's just terrible.
First year...
Just impossible in itself, and it presupposes a certain understanding of reality from which it justifies. It's like liberal reasoning justifying liberal conclusions.
Utilitarian student. Most would probably say, no, Jim should be able to take himself. And therefore, utilitarianism in its purest form has to be false, right? I mean...
Well, that...
maybe 2 times speed. And it's on 2, I think, but on 1.5.
But and this is why. Okay, listen. When you met me last, I said I hated meta ethics, but now I'm kind of wondering about normative ethics. Okay, because I feel like these systems can become so stretched and arbitrary that they can morph into themselves. Because I think what a utilitarian was doing, if he really wanted to fight for his system, what the utilitarian would do is he would say, well, actually, this is still utilitarianism, but the utility of his individual life he would measure for himself as being worth more than the utility of a stranger's life. So it's actually still utilitarianism to save yourself instead of 5 other people because you're worth 10 utils and every other person is worth 1 util or something like that, right?
Okay, but if we actually look at that from, like, let's say that the 5 people, like, let's just add on to the situation and say that you actually know that their 5 combined utilities in life and the impact that they're going to have on other people will be greater than yours. But that doesn't seem to change anything.
I would actually argue that I think it does change anything. Or I'm sorry, it does change something. So for instance, here is something. So I'm being very emotional when I answer this question. Okay, if somebody were to say, do you want to save the life of your child or 4 other children? I truly don't think I could like say, sorry, Nathan, you've got to die. I don't think I could do it. But if somebody were to have like, would you save Nathan or your entire school full of children? That would be a lot harder. I would have a much harder time saying, sorry, I'm going to go with my kid over the 1,000 other kids in his score.
100%.
Yeah. So it does seem like there is some, now if we want to say utilitarian, like, well, my kid's utility to me is much higher than the utility of other children. But there is some threshold, there is some number of people that once it's surpassed, like, okay, like.
See, this is why threshold deontology, man. W.D. Ross, The Right and the Good. Check it out.
I can't at this point make this decision, and same thing with self-sacrifice too. Like, if I had to sacrifice myself to save like 4 other people in a car, I don't know if I could do it. But if it was like me and there was like a building full of people and for somehow I could run downstairs and pull up and if it was between like me dying and like 10,000 people die, like that becomes a lot harder. Like fuck, like I feel a lot worse about the decision, Yeah, but appealing a little to intuition here, but yeah.
Well, but this is the thing about and I mean, this is why I don't really like normative ethics anyways in the first place, is because that's what you find is that it's all appeals to intuition. I mean, you read any of these papers by any famous normative philosopher who aren't writing meta ethics, and it's almost always like, oh, well, I feel this way.
Yeah, this is the problem with normative ethics. I absolutely agree. Like, it's like normative ethics without a meta-ethical foundation is just empty.
And so
in terms of measuring, well, because there's no philosopher, no person, well, even in economics, measuring utility is literally impossible.
No, but I mean in general, in normative ethics, that's how a lot of people argue, which is to say, this case seems wrong to me, so I'm going to reject the theory.
Sure.
Or this case seems a little bit more plausible to me intuitively, so I'm going to say that this theory is correct. That's how a lot of normative ethicists argue, and I think that's a really stupid way of going about arguing. And that's why I really like Kant, because Kant grounds it out in, or attempts to ground it out in actual like necessity. It's a necessary condition, of our.
Or better yet, we'll go Hegel, and then it's like taking the foundations of the Kantian position and applying them to a position which is real and action urging. Moving from the loftiness of Kant is actually like what Hegel says.
Our experience that we have certain reasons that we ought to follow, right? Instead of just an appeal to, well, this case seems like it wouldn't be correct, so let's see what follows next. Or I reject this, Elizabeth Anscombe responded to a paper, I think by Jonathan Bennett, attacking like a hyper form of deontology, because Elizabeth Anscombe thought that it's immoral to kill anybody ever, even in the case of preventing
self-defense or preventing further harm or something. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think she was an awful person. But she wrote a response to Jonathan Bennett's paper, basically criticizing her position, which just said, this doesn't seem right to me, and that's all. It's literally like 30 words long, and it was published in a peer-reviewed paper.
Okay.
And yeah, that's how a lot of these people argue, and I think that just shows a detraction of, or it shows an issue that exists within that. But people have really moved on from that. People don't usually argue like that anymore. It's been the advent of reasons in metaethics. Everything is about reasons now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a reason to do this? If so, is that an objective reason? How does reasoning structure the way that we interact with the world? And and then you take it to
it's only taken them 200 years to catch up with Hegel.
Epistemology too, right? Epistemic reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think that's the way that you go. But again, you're not going to learn this in a philosophy 101 course. And I mean, I'm not expecting someone like Vaush to go and read all the meta-ethical literature, but just a basic familiarity with ethical systems and the common arguments.
But I just don't understand.
Well, at the very least,
like, here's my position. Like, I think that if you're a layman, it makes far more sense just to say like morality is objective. Like the majority of philosophers are saying morality is objective. They're experts. Intuitionally, will approach morality in terms of socio-political. It's when we're raised, we're told things are right and wrong, and we're not told that that's because of how we feel. We're told that they're right and wrong. At least I was, and I think most people are. So I think like it's just the edgelord position to take. The like morality is like not real, and everything's a social construct, and everything. But then to not do any reading in it, like it is just a way to establish yourself as some sort of unique little snowflake in reality, isn't it? It's so ironic. It's like the blind atheist and the blind theist, right? The person that has blind faith because they've been raised in a family of, an theistic family in a theistic community, and then you have the blind atheist, which is that they have blind or anti-theist, like that blindly against the idea of religion because they were raised in a society with religion and so on. They're just reactive. There's no like expression of freedom and knowledge there. There is no genuine like authenticity. All they are is just the same person on the opposite side of the fence. It's just the same issue.
So you don't fall into various blunders. And it seems like people just aren't willing to put in the effort to do that, and that's I don't understand. Like what other things does Vaush have to do? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like it'd be one thing if he was like working a full-time job or something, but I mean he could do a philosophy stream where he just reads philosophy, and he would still rake in a ton of money, enough to support himself, right? But I mean I say the same thing to you, but I've talked to you about that before. But sure. I think it's worse in his position because it's
makes some more outlandish claims and stuff.
Yes, yeah. But again, I don't know what is this? That's what I want to ask you is what is the solution for dealing with actors like him? Is the solution to just go on fucking debate panels with him and yell at him? And
I think it has to be like you have to like do this rhetorically. You have to make their position be persuasive to other people and make it seem like abhorrent. Like that's all you can do.
Yeah, the issue is that people will just readily buy in. Like if you don't have background in philosophy, it can seem like there's nothing wrong with epistemic anti-realism. Because for a lot of people, it doesn't affect people's everyday. Like a lot of people think philosophy is just useless.
Well, and also it's easier to buy into that argument too because it feels good and it lets you basically get.
Yeah, and I think that's what they do. I think that like Vaush's community, philosophy is useless. Oh, I hate philosophers, and it's really just a way to just go like, look, I don't want to have to justify my positions. I don't want to have to give reasons. I just want to assert what I think's the case, and then we'll argue a little bit, and I go away and I believe whatever I want, like existing in a life of bad faith. And look, Heidegger talks about this in terms of the idle talk. people are scared of something, which puts them in this position where they're just engaged in aesthetics. And like, I think like Blanchot builds on this in terms of like, this idea of meaning, right? Like life and death aren't just expressions of like physical states of being. They're expressions of like our genuine authenticity in the world. Can we die without dying is one of the things that he talks about, right? And I genuinely think that people have this fear of death, but it's not a fear of death in terms of like the like the genuine end of their life, although that's part of it. I think it's a fear of metaphysical death, of a death of their identity. They fear losing their grip with reality, which is holding their actions and justifying what they are doing. They fear the consequences of seeing the truth, and they fear the consequences of losing who they are, right? They just want to express themselves, and a fear of becoming ungrounded means that they may lose their effectiveness in the world. At least that's how they perceive it. When in reality, it might be the first step to becoming more effective, to actually gaining what's in your own interests. And I think that this is a lot of the time why people are very anti-philosophy, because ultimately it's questioning that dogmatism, and it's uncomfortable. People are scared of the unknown, and they're worried that they're not going to be able to live a life that they think is going to be beneficial for them. And I think that philosophy opens up that caveat. Like, look, you're just going to have to think about it. Are you ready for that? Like, are you ready to take the responsibility of yourself? Are you ready to choose yourself? Are you ready to choose being a chooser in an existentialist sense? And I think philosophy is that mechanism in which you can choose to be a chooser. And I think that it's the thing that most people flee from. And until we really question that as a society, of whether we will question ourselves and be willing to sacrifice ourselves for ourselves, then we're never going to make any headway. And I mean, that actual quote, sacrifice, I give myself to myself. I was told that in relation to an ancient Norse mythological take in which Odin was supposed to hang himself on the tree of knowledge in order to gain the runes. And like, obviously runes being like language. So like, he essentially gives himself, he destroys himself for the possibility of knowing himself. He said, I give myself to myself. And I think that's the position that we'll have to be willing to take in order to gain genuine freedom.
Get away with anything you want. Like, it's a pretty base position. Like, if I say like I'm an epistemic anti-realist, I can literally say anything I fucking want to.
Yes,
like,
exactly.
Which is awesome. So like, yeah.
And so the question is, how do you combat that? I mean, the way that's combated in philosophy, for example, is those positions just aren't taken seriously. I mean, they are in the fringes of philosophy where that's actually being studied, right? Like in higher level metaepistemology, right? But you could never write a paper talking about like consumption under capitalism and whether it's moral or not, and then justify it by saying, well, consumption under capitalism is okay or is not okay, therefore I'm able to do whatever I want because someone else is going to do it. And ultimately the reason why is because I'm an epistemic anti-realist, right? You would never be published because it's such a stupid thing, like a stupid argument. And there's like self-regulation in that respect. But I mean, those are people that are trained in philosophy. So the question is, how do you take those criticisms and those responses and
distill them for it, yeah. I mean, it's hard.
That for everyday audience.
And the academic communities in general just say it's not worth their time. That's why you see something like, for instance, like race realists. It's taken so long for anyone academically to pay attention to that because it's like, oh, this isn't really worth our time. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, even like anti-vaxxers, right? I mean, they don't get published, really. I mean, there are sporadic, weird one-off publications, right? But they're not taken seriously. And that people will say that I'm appealing to authority, right? But I mean, it's just the same thing as something like an anti-vaxxer. If the entire scientific community...
It's not an appeal to authority. It's the fact that the institution has recognized that position is unfounded to the point in which, like, when they read the papers, they're like, this isn't worth publishing. This is absolutely terrible. So we're not going to publish it. It's just a way of, like, preventing anyone from being published, like, and making terrible arguments. You can make those arguments online, but if your paper is terrible and unfounded, then there's no point in getting anyone to read it. Like,
thinks that this is not something worth considering, then it doesn't necessarily mean that it's 100% false, but you should take like a long, hard look at whether you want to uphold that position.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that's an important feature of philosophy that I think people should respect more. But everyone thinks that they can do philosophy, and everyone can do philosophy. It's just
the problem is everybody does philosophy, whether you know anything about it or not, because everything is kind of an exercise in that.
Yeah, and I would go so far as to say everyone thinks that they are the foundation of philosophy. It's like, people have been doing this for a long time, like philosophy, like 3,000 years, right? And until you recognize that these conversations have been going on for a really long time between some of the greatest minds who ever live, then why are you trying? You need to ask yourself the question: why are you trying to start the field again? And I see loads of people in ethics thinking that they can learn some basic logic and start the field again.
Yeah, everything sort of trickles back to it, so it's it's difficult. And I mean, I tried for like a couple years, and I just got called pretentious, and so I don't know what the solution necessarily is. I mean, I wish I could say people like philosophy too, but I've never liked philosophy too. I've never liked the content. I think it's very shallow. It doesn't engage enough with the material. It often can actually not represent a lot of the positions correctly. And I mean, the recent shit with, oh my god, the like, well, why would you not show your fucking income? It makes no sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, she still isn't doing that, right?
Yeah, she released like a detailed breakdown of her expenses, and there wasn't a single. Well, she said it was, but there wasn't a single number listed. It was just really funny. She was just like, I spent. You'd have to go. I can't. And honestly, it sounds like I'm making this up, but she was like, here's a detailed breakdown of everything I do. And she's like, well, I pay my editor's time, I pay for costumes, and like, yeah, that cost me a lot of money, and then I make a decent amount of money. And that was like her detailed breakdown. It was like hilarious. Yeah.
But she didn't say how much she was.
No, she didn't give any numbers for anything anywhere. Yeah.
That's not a breakdown.
I know. That's why it was funny. Yeah.
Okay. And then well, it's hard to criticize people like that because people will get very angry if you criticize people like
cults of personality,
like philosophy too, for ContraPoints.
Sure.
But I mean, I've never been a big fan of. I don't know. I don't like this idea of making philosophy entertainment, I guess.
I mean, I think there is a place for a lot of like pop science or pop philosophy. It's just you have to be careful not to be so reductive that you're misrepresenting the material,
yes.
Right?
Exactly. And I think that if you put more effort into like really engaging, I don't think it's a coincidence that the most popular the most prominent popularizers of philosophy are engaging with, well, I don't know. I'll just
ask yourselves, come to the debate. What do you mean? Like, what is he? Is he in that debate now? You serious?
Say you're not seeing a lot of popularizers engaging with anything that doesn't fall into like
popular political narratives, or
yes, it's often it's often Marxist thought, it's often root. And I mean, look, I am a socialist, and I think that stuff is very valuable, but I don't think it's a coincidence that sometimes it's quite shallow and
sure.
It doesn't feel like it's been engaged with. Like, it feels like stuff I could read in my introductory.
But the thing is that it's shallow. Like it's because it's a sociological take on Marxism, right? Like, where it's just someone trying to explain Marxism to like an A-level class or something, where they don't actually read Marx. They don't even read people who are talking about Marx. At best, they read like a secondary source, they take it out of context, and then they express what Marxism is, and then they move on, right? So it's a terrible take. And Marxism is a complex set of philosophical principles, right? Like, there's a lot going on in Marx. It's a really, like, Marx is like that. Like, Capital is like a bookshelf in and of itself, right? Capital is as a critique of political economy is fucking huge. And I haven't read all of Capital, not even close. I would never call myself like a Marxist scholar, a Marxian scholar, because it's just, there's so much in Karl Marx's work that like you genuinely have to take the time to really go into it, right? And that's just the primary literature. Then you've got the secondary literature, right? I call myself a Hegelian because I've read enough Hegel and enough secondary literature to go, yeah, I can justify this, but barely. Like, and I'm a PhD student. If I was, and it's so many people that call themselves Marxists who've maybe read like Wage, Labor, and Capital, and then they're like, I understand it. And that's if they're good Marxists that they've read Wage, Labor, and Capital. A lot of the time they just do what they want, man.
Lecture in continental, philosophy.
Yeah. So the distillation of this in a single point is, I would guesstimate that literally less than 5% of all content creators that are lefties could even explain like what the labor value theory is, like unironically, which is like the very. I think when you're reading Capital.
Absolutely, and I would say this. Look, after reading like Capital. The way that they take the way that he talks about the wage, the labor theory of value in Capital is so different to the way in which people talk about it online. You see people talking about the labor theory of value, especially right-wing people. Actually, they think that it's like how many hours you work, when it's like not that at all, not necessarily, because he talks about. How like an individual who works less hard and someone who works harder and stuff like that. Like, he's not necessarily, it's not so clean cut. I think that he does make a little bit of a jump in terms of exchange values, which I'll probably talk about in another stream. But and he doesn't ground it on anything in reality in terms of human life. So it seems a little bit abstract in many ways. And he just assumes that the giver of value is labor. But in terms of talking about labor, and the labor theory of value, he talks about abstract labor, the labor that is basically measured against the value that is produced, rather than like the product that is produced, rather than like just time worked. Like, he doesn't take that. But people just like, well, what happens if someone just the same amount of like time or something, or labor's just as hard but doesn't produce as much? And it's like, no, like Marx wouldn't say that the labor is hard. Like, that's the thing.
Well, it's literally like fucking 10 or 15 pages in. Like, you immediately start to get into like the relations between labor and everything. And like, I think that less than 5% of content creators could even just tell you what that is, which is like step 0.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that always annoys me is, Marxists who will say, oh, I've read Marx. But then the issue is how you go about justifying Marxism. And I think the most prominent answer to that would be like through Hegel, right? And these people have never read Hegel. So they don't actually know how to justify, because that shit is hard. It's fucking hard. But instead they do the shallow stuff and they get the material analysis, right? Well, the fucking material analysis doesn't matter for your ethical system. You're not referencing Marx to justify, what you ought to do.
Yeah, and remember, like, look, when Marx is talking about like alienation and stuff, he's building off Hegel. So he's got like this really solid, like, although he takes a different metaphysical take, he's got a really solid like dialectical like conversation in terms of the philosophy of right, in which he's like basically responding to. He's got like a whole field of like, in terms of politics, in relation to the ethics of the day, from which he's trying to build on. And like, you have to take Marx in relation to that. Like, he's not just Hegel reference alert. He's not just like building, like just assuming ethics and stuff out of nowhere. Like, he was a young Hegelian. Like, he was a Hegelian in his origins.
Because Marx is not really laying out that type of normative system. It's mostly a descriptive framework of economic theory, a lot of which turned out to be false. But then people built upon that. People built upon that and developed normative systems within that, and then that's what's used to justify socialism. But no one ever goes beyond just reading, the Communist Manifesto. Yeah. I mean, Vaush has never read Marx, and yeah, it's crazy to me that
and
people
he says that as well, and yet he's the socialist leader. He hasn't even read Karl Marx. Like, has he even read any other socialist? I know he like flees from theory, but like, come on, like, and I know he says that he's got like unmedicated ADHD or something, right? And I get that, right? I'm pretty sure I've got ADHD and also dyspraxic, so I've really struggled to read anyway. I'm drinking Diet Coke because I'm a bad person, but like, I'm also I'm like addicted to cola. But what was I saying? It's like, essentially, so yeah, like he's what was I saying? It was like, shit, that's totally sent us off. Like, I don't know why. Oh yeah, but he holding yourself as some sort of like political leader, whilst in terms of socialism, but then not having read any of the theory behind it is just nonsense to me.
Who identify themselves with that branding, but don't even engage with the material at all, But again, I don't know what the solution. Like, you say, you have to rhetorically show how their arguments are poor and lead to crazy solutions, but I don't know how you measure the effectiveness of that. I don't know how you determine.
Well, you meant by Reddit threads and subscribers, basically. It's frustrating, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right.
Well, anyways, yeah. Oh, let me. Well.
Oh, thanks for the donation. I'm your agnostic, but what would you say your favorite argument for God, contingency, Calum, or fine tuning? Fine tuning would be my favorite argument.
I was gonna. Do you want to? Can you unban me from DGG?
Sure thing, bud.
RTBA, RTBA. Let's make peace. Okay.
All right. Have fun, buddy.
And let me show myself out here. You should definitely donate to the Indigenous Gwich'in Standing Committee. I know people don't give a shit about it, but if you like this conversation, put your money there. And yeah, that's
not promoting veganism as a vegan. Come on, Rem.
Anyways, it's been fun. I hope you don't get a lot of shit for this conversation, or maybe I hope you do, because that'll give you good content. So.
Well, thanks. Well, good luck with everything, but be careful.
Yeah, you too. Have a good night. Bye.
Okay, so I don't know what the hell goes on after this, because like.
Fairly straightforward.
Okay.
All right. Well, that was that. Well, you can go over and see if Destiny's still alive. You can go over and see if he wants to have a chat. I don't know what he's doing now. Wait a minute. How am I awake? What do you mean? Just because 4 a.m. I've just woke up, guys. I'm actually really a functional human being. I haven't been streaming for a while. Yeah. Thing is, how do you know I'm awake? That's the real question. See if I can find the YouTube link, because I don't think YouTube likes you linking out of the
was to
right. Original video. There we go. Oh. Right. I'm actually probably going to review a debate in a second between inspiring philosophy and I'll probably review the debate between inspiring philosophy and cosmic skeptic. But I'll probably do a quick Q&A before I do that and use the quote-unquote restroom. So, O wise philosopher king, thoughts on miracles and on David Hume's famous treatise on the subject. David Hume really only, I think, only has an argument. Like one, his position is pretty, from what I remember, is pretty powerful. But I think there've been some pretty substantial like naturalist takes on miracles, which have like showed that miracles can occur within nature, yet defended from Hume's criticism. But I'd have to refresh myself on the arguments more than anything, because it's been that long since I've read Hume. So I don't want to like go out on a limb too much. Do I like vegan gains? I do like vegan gains. Vegan gains is apparently going against an ethics professor in a debate. Can someone just tell me why he thinks that he's capable of doing that, though? Like, I really like Richard. I think he's a cool guy. Me and him are going to have a conversation on socialism again soon. Like a discussion. Which is really cool. And I think he's like, I think he's capable of like some pretty like high level reasoning. And I think he's smart. And I just don't think that he's a philosopher. And I really hope that he doesn't go into a debate against an ethics professor because he's just way out of his depth. Yeah. I don't know, man. Like, what do you guys think? Am I being silly saying that? I think that it's just a bit much. Like, I don't care. Like, he just might misrepresent veganism really more than anything. Like, especially to a higher level community. Like, in terms of like debating a professor, like it's not a good idea. Like, why didn't he just come to like I don't even think I'm the only like vegan philosopher that he may know. So like, why didn't he just go to one of them? Like, ideally me, being a post-grad writing his PhD thesis on veganism. That would be nice, but no, jack of all trade, master of none, like Humean constructivism, I'm not a fan of it. I think that ultimately, I don't think it pans out in terms of normativity. I think that you are it's basically like it's like like if you presuppose like a given particular individual viewpoint, you can make hypothetical imperatives. No, I think that's I think ultimately dependent upon really the Hume is or distinction. To even reach that point, like to say that, look, morality isn't the case, like morality isn't objective, so how does it function and how must it function from this point on? And then you end up in something like, maybe like Stevenson's norm like expressivism or something like that. Hardest concept I've ever encountered in philosophy. Hardest concept I've ever encountered. Ooh. What is the hardest concept I've ever encountered? Usually the more difficult the concept, the more like fun I find it, which makes it a bit easier in some respects in terms of motivation. Like if it's like a really difficult concept and it's really like getting us like like what's going on. Like I'm like then motivated to like find out what's going on. So it kind of like keeps us going. But the hardest concept. The hardest concept. I'd probably say like something like Kantian transcendental idealism is pretty hard. Like some sort of Kantian takes. I'd definitely say that that's hard. What's your most niche philosophy hot take? Most niche. Most niche philosophy hot take. Oh, I would probably say that I'd probably take the position that I don't know. It depends on what you mean by niche, man. Ben, what do you mean by niche? Yeah, man, nice to see the viewers here. Like it was like 130 or something before. At least combined between the streams. Ben, drop in the chat what you mean by niche. Like, I guess like, do you mean something that like I like personally hold that's quite like rare to hold, or do you mean like something that I think is like a really like I don't know. I'd probably say like I'd probably hold to the principle that like, for example, the ancient Christians couldn't have been wrong for being slave owners. They couldn't have known it. They were wrong, but they couldn't have known it. And then I would have said that ultimately it's the same thing in relation to the dogmatism that permeates our culture in terms of the bourgeois and the proletariat and their engagement with one another, and that we all, as the proletariat, are currently enslaving ourselves in a master-slave dynamic in terms of employee-employer relationships from which we fundamentally participate in order to engage in some sort of like understanding of reality. But we can't reject that absolutely in terms of revolution without destroying the possibility of actually obtaining the revolutionary goal. Would you say that would be like a niche take? But then obviously we should move towards the abolition of these unjust authoritative structures, social structures. Yes, that's what I wanted. Thank you. Right, cool, man. Gender abolitionism. I don't think that like I don't think you can just like I don't know whether gender is it depends on whether we think gender is a good or a bad thing. I don't think it's necessarily all a bad thing. I think that removing it is probably not going to be the best thing for terms of like sexual expression, stuff like that. And yeah, can you differentiate between transcendental idealism and absolute idealism? Transcendental idealism differentiates reality into two separate substructures or even dual aspect theory in terms of the noumena and the phenomena, whilst absolute idealism holds that the noumena, really the real, is an aspect of the phenomena. It's like and we can come to know the real in and of itself. So we don't actually the phenomena and the real are both aspects of a reality which is knowable, right? That like the real can become known and enter into the phenomena, can be signified, in other words. It's Brendables donated, and thank you very much. Hi PP, glad you could catch your stream. I don't know whether I'm sorry about the not going through in terms of a alert box. I'll sort that out. As my sleeping schedule is pretty inconsistent, lol. I know the feeling. Do you have any tips on places/forums where I could find good recommendations for secondary literature? Honestly, no, not do that. Bloody, it's irritating me. Yeah. I'd say like one of the best places to find good secondary literature is if you go to Stanford and then you scroll down to the bibliography and you see what the authors are referencing. There's a good place in terms of like secondary literature on that topic. A lot of the time they reference like really good secondary literature. And then also check out readers' guides. Readers' guides on those topics usually recommend further reading in terms of secondary literature. So they would be the places that I would recommend. It's Brendable. Thank you for your donation. I know you're agnostic, but are you atheistic towards a specific variant of belief? I can't imagine you find Mormon or Wiccan theology as compelling as Catholic/Orthodox. Yeah, I guess it's like, look, in terms of like, it depends on what we mean in terms of agnostic and agnostic. Did I just hit 5K? Really? Did I just hit 5K? I'm sorry. It depends on what we mean in terms of agnostic and theistic anyway. Obviously specific ideologies I wouldn't even say are represented in terms of I'd probably say like, look, I'm agnostic towards like, I don't know, like ancient Greek gods, like, or atheist towards ancient Greek gods. Like, I'm agnostic in terms of like the existence of like a omnibenevolent, omniscient creator or a first cause. And did I really hit 5K subs? So I'm going to check that out, man. $5K subs! Represent! Hey! Yeah, boy! 1 second, that was just... Hey, welcome to the club, everyone. I am your new aesthetic ideal. Oh, this is a nice moment for everyone. I hope you remember where you were when Perspective Philosophy hit 5K subs, you know. PP hands, yeah. Yeah, I know. I deleted the alert box in the Vaush debate because it was pinging off. You're going to have a lot more soon, I can almost guarantee it. I hope so. I hope so, Carlos. I really do. Congratulations. Thanks, man. I was here from the beginning. And Magnus, you actually were 100%. That's why you're a mod, man. You're a mod in the chat, aren't you? Did I make you a mod on the... Congrats on 5K. Is the end goal to be a content creator, or do you just have a different career plans and are leaving us someday? No, my plan is actually to be a content creator. So yeah, I won't be going anywhere. Thank you very much. Thoughts on Thank you very much, Brendable. It's Brendable. I really appreciate it. Thoughts on accelerationism. Also, congrats on the growth recently. I hope you remember us plebs when you're not plebs, man, but thanks. When you're a multi-thousand viewer streamer. I hope I do get there one day. Like, you know, spread some really great great information, genuine knowledge and truth. That would be great. Spreading the philosophy. But thoughts on acceleration. Accelerationism is fundamentally misguided. Ultimately, it wouldn't produce anything but the collapse of capitalism. If it does, right, it may just produce something that is worse than capitalism anyway. And ultimately, what we need is rational critique moving us towards socialism. And so we don't want to accelerate capitalism. We want to modify and reform capitalism to become a better and fairer society. I think accelerationism is fundamentally misguided. I never modded you on YouTube, did I not? Oh, I'm modded you on YouTube right now. But yeah, man, I'm really happy. Everyone, we need celebration music on or something. 5,004. 411 subs in the last 28 days, man. Right. Where? Oh yeah, I was going to settings. Hey. Be careful. Right. Okay, I can't remember where to put bloody damn. I can't remember how to do it. Right. One second, like aha. All right, I've got you. It's not finding you, man. You're a ghost. Spook.
Is your agency's website built or drive?
Stop. Oh, and thank you for the donation. $5 for 5k subs. And I'm sorry I've never modded you on chat. I'm actually trying to do that now. Oh, there we go. Add moderator. Didn't realize I could do it that way around. It was telling us to just go the long way. Feel the power, man. Will you ever try to have another conversation with Vaush? Absolutely. And that Vaush clout, that is actually right. Well, it's Vaush and Destiny. I got like Destiny, like reviewing the Destiny one, like got us like and then obviously Vegan Gains as well. I got like 300 subs from actually got like 300 subs like a while ago from Vegan Gains. I think it was like Vegan Gains, the Destiny debate and stuff. So it was like Destiny, Vegan Gains, and Vaush. It's just big names, man. It makes a hell of a difference on YouTube. Just the way it is. Just mod everyone. We'll mod everyone. You know, we'll do the like. It's a way to just totally destabilize. Like, if everyone's a mod, no one's a mod. Do you think that what works do you think recommend that counter asceticism? Like honestly, like Hegel, really bad. Like really, like absolutely takes it apart. I would say Reader's Guide to the Philosophy of Right explains why. Just even if you see his arguments against Stoicism. You found us through Vegan Gains. Oh, that's cool, man. Right. 94 out of 5,000 subs watching. That's just the way of things. That's just the way it is. Right. Okay. Mod me, then tell me about the dialectic. Okay, so the dialectic is based upon a contention between two individuals in terms of ideology. So the ideology is essentially a thesis, antithesis two-step, which is constantly merging into itself. So thesis is proposed by one individual, antithesis is proposed by the other, in relation to a power dynamic in which they try to assert an understanding of reality, which then metaphysically steps from one to the next as it synthesizes to express to overcome the issues of the other. And so there's a constant emergence, really, in terms of the dialectic between the self and the other. That's about the foundation of the dialectic. And thank you very much for the donation. The first 100 subscriber gang. Oh, well, it's Brendable. Nice, man. Like love it. Another debate with Vaush and Destiny would be very entertaining. I would love to debate Destiny. If he wasn't busy right now, I'd just say like, please go over and let him know, like, because that guy, that like, I was trying to call out Destiny. I was calling him out in the chat as he went into debate Vaush, and I was like, for fuck's sake. And then I started watching the Vaush debate, and I was like, this is awful. This is awful. This is even worse. All right, I'll be right back, guys. I'm just gonna quickly use the restroom. But yeah, 5K subs. I hope, I'm really, thank you everyone who subscribed. Like, it means the world. Like, it really does. I didn't know if I was going to get here. Those times when I just didn't think I was going to receive like any growth. And I was just like really down about it. I was like, oh, fuck's sake, man, it's not going to happen. But thank you everyone. Absolutely right. This is actually just the sound that I make when I go to the bathroom. It has nothing. There's no music playing. Right. Oh, that's cool, Ben. Like, you went from like singer to cosmic skeptic to me. That's pretty cool, man. That's a proper like roundabout way. That's a great way to get discovered, though, via Peter Singer. One final burning question: what would you recommend to argue for the first-person viewpoint of ethics? It's not that we hold ourselves first and foremost, it's that we can only operate from a first person position. And so in terms of being driven, we have to take into consideration the drives of the agent in relation to ethics. What they can do is determined by what they can be motivated by. And so if we take into consideration like ethical motivation, then we can't have abstract notions of right. It has to be grounded in relation to desire. I could fall asleep listening to this music long enough. It is really soothing, isn't it? I love that. I love that playlist. Right. So, there is now, we're going to change this stream up to a theological stream. So, wait a minute. So now I've just got to quickly grab the link. Holy hell.
Need a freelancer? Go to Fiverr.com and find one in
Hey guys, welcome to another.
Everything's going wrong. Oh my god, that's horrible. Okay. Okay. Oh my god. Right. So, one last thing, and then we're on my way. On my way. I would like to reach out my Vamos a everybody on. Right. So, right. PhD student here. All right, as soon as that saves, I think we're good to go. So I'm going to be reviewing the Cosmic Skeptic versus Inspiring Philosophy debate. I've never seen this debate. I don't know what's going to be said except for the moral argument, because that's in the title. So can honestly say I'm not very convinced by the moral argument, hence still being agnostic. And honestly, I think it was the worst argument I've ever seen for the existence of God. So yeah, we're going to get into this. If I could resolve me tech issues, I'd become too powerful and overthrow God. I don't know, it'd be like I'd be watching like the Preacher or something. I will forgive you for that if you now explain how ground idealism or really where to start. Kant. Start with Kant. Move to Hegel. Oh, hi, Marty. How you doing, man? Debate. That's what they are called these days. Absolutely. That's the philosophy chat. How you doing, man? You having a good one? I'd say that the most compelling argument for God is the fine-tuning argument, but I don't think it gives you like evidence for the existence of God. It's just like it's a nice argument though. The man needs some advice on ethics. Did you actually manage to talk to him? So he's like, is he actually willing? Is Vaush actually willing to like hear someone out on ethics? Holy shit. He just memed me throughout most of the debate. Implications of idealism being true. It depends on what idealism you subscribe to. I'd say that objective idealism, not too much, not too much, except for that we can't create causal theories in relation to mind. Expressed in like psychology, I would say. I would argue anyway. Don't know if philosophy chat will agree here. I'm doing good. I'm here to yell at Cosmic Skeptic. Absolutely. Oh, that's cool, man. I asked Cosmic Skeptic and Rationality Rules if either of them wanted to defend the position. I'll tell you what I said. I said, hi peeps, just wondering if you guys would be interested in arguing that it is irrational to believe in the tri-omni God. If so, I'd be happy to debate this. Let me know. Neither of them got back, but I know that Rationality Rules says that it's irrational to believe in an omnibenevolent God, an omniscient, omnibenevolent, omnipotent God, and I think that it's absolutely rational. Just as rational as it's not to believe in, the tri-omni God, hence being an agnostic. So yeah. You told him that you'd help him with his brand of ethics. Oh my God, no! Don't empower evil. You're like the king's executioner. What are you doing, Marty? Right, I'm going to jump into this debate review now. So, am I pro-choice or pro-life? To put that on. Oh my God, my tech issues are like the worst. I'm actually a sentientist, so I wouldn't say I'm like, I'd say like pro-life and pro-choice don't adequately express what is right. So yeah. Right. So this is the debate that I'll be reviewing. So I hope you're interested in this debate, guys. This debate is Inspiring Philosophy versus Cosmic Skeptic on the moral argument for God. I'm an agnostic PhD student. My name is Perspective Philosophy, apparently, not Lewis Howarth. And yeah, I've got a master's degree and a bachelor's in philosophy already. And I focus on ethics primarily, but I do take some interest in theology. So I'm going to review this debate and see if it's convincing or not. So let's get into it.
Another edition of Capturing Christianity. My name is Cameron, and I run a ministry called Capturing Christianity. It's aimed at exposing the intellectual side of Christian belief. I'm actually a photographer, if you didn't know that. That is my profession, and so I sort of do apologetics on the side. It's something that I really think about and like a lot. It's a big interest of mine. Well, anyways, if this is your first time here on the show watching, I host discussions every now and then between Christians and non-Christians, and it's a fairly regular basis. We actually had one just a few days ago, but I try to schedule them about once a month. And today we have a sort of clash of the YouTubers. We're discussing the moral argument with Cosmic Skeptic and Inspiring Philosophy, and both of these guys run very successful, very, very successful YouTube channels. Alex O'Connor is the creator of Cosmic Skeptic. He's the guy there with the green background, and he's been doing it for about 2 years, and he has nearly 200,000 subscribers, which is insane. And he recently posted some videos that concern the moral argument, and so I figured it was a good idea to invite him on to have a discussion. And these are very informal discussions. They're structured in some sense, but I invited him on to discuss with a seasoned apologist, so we could have a little back and forth about the moral argument, some of the ideas that were presented in his video there. And so, on the other hand, Michael is the mastermind behind Inspiring Philosophy. And his channel boasts some 60,000 subscribers. I think you guys just surpassed that fairly recently, so that's pretty cool. And so Michael has his own set of videos on moral argument. If you want to go check those out, just go to his channel and search. There's all his videos on morality and ethics and God and all that stuff, so go check those out after the show. If you want to learn more about my guest, head over to the website, capturingchristianity.com. That's also where you can go to find all of our social media links, Facebook, Twitter. Facebook is actually...
But Marty, he's like, look, Vaush is not just a utilitarian. Like, that's his normative position. But if you ask him about, like, whether... he takes everything to be subjective. Just saying, like, check out me discussion with him. Like, he literally goes epistemic anti-realist. So please, if you get the chance, just get him out of that. Anyway, on with the discussion.
Actually, where we do most of our stuff. Twitter, I'm on there every now and then. And we also have a podcast. So if you want to search for that on iTunes, SoundCloud is also where it's hosted. And if you've been enjoying the content that we've been producing, do two things. First, hit the subscribe button. That's really easy. It's also free. Secondly, head over to patreon.com/capturingchristianity. We've recently introduced a early access model on Patreon. So people that donate, I think it's $5 a month, get early access to articles and podcast episodes. We recently just released a podcast episode on Friday. That was really interesting. It's got a ton of hits, actually. Well, anyways, let's that out of the way. It's only been a couple minutes. It's a pretty good intro. Let's jump right into the show. So today, like I said, we're discussing the moral argument. So welcome to the show, guys, Alex and Michael. Michael, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you. Yeah, thanks for having me back.
And so, Alex, tell me a little about the what sort of sparked the video that you posted recently. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, right? It was like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, so it really wasn't long ago. Basically, as people who follow my channel will know, for the past few months or so, I've been a bit out of action due to exams, so I haven't been uploading or anything. But over that time, it's not like I wasn't thinking about philosophy, because it's what I do. It's my favorite thing to do. So although I couldn't upload, I was doing a lot of thinking, and the main thing on my mind was moral philosophy. And so because I had this big gap, I had this incredible breadth of time that I don't usually get to think about this one topic that was on my mind before kind of dealing with it and moving on. So I was thinking about it for a very long time and thinking about it from an atheistic perspective. And it only fairly recently struck me that it's not necessarily a given that if God exists, morality has to be objective, which I think many people do treat that as a given. And so when that thought struck me, I realized just how many avenues there are to talk about moral philosophy from, and I realized that I was inevitably going to be talking about all sorts of problems that stem from morality, things like nihilism, things like religious morality and atheistic morality and Sam Harris's morality. And I realized that the thing that I'll need to do first is make a clear case for my moral philosophy, what I mean by certain terms, what I think about certain moral ideas. And so I thought that I'd do a short series basically covering all grounds.
I just want to know what he means, like, if God was to exist, that morality wouldn't have to be objective. Well, I mean, it depends on the God, but let's say we take the Christian triomni God, right? 100% would have to be objective. Like, even if you take divine command theory, it would be objectively right. Like, good and bad is based off the word of God, right? Like the words of God, then, in like some sort of somewhat like of a contentious take. And then if you don't even take it to be like that, rather than like just divine command, you could say that God is good, and since goodness would exist in the world, it by definition it is objective, like embodied in God, right? Like, I don't know how you would.
And the best place to start, I thought, was with religious morality, followed by one covering atheistic morality, and then it's kind of all bases covered. So even if I'm talking in the context of a God existing, I can still make my case and still refer to a video. So it was mainly just to get my philosophy out there in a coherent form, you know.
Well, I think it's safe to say that the moral argument is something that a lot of people find fascinating. At least, you know, if anything to think about, because morality is so, it hits us on sort of an existential level, and so it's fun to think about. You don't really have to be a super intelligent philosopher to really think about these issues and to be moved by them. So I think it's really cool that we've got you here, that you've been thinking about it. And then also, on the other hand, Michael has produced a series of videos on the moral argument. Why don't we talk about those a little bit, and then we'll jump into the discussion. So yeah. So what sort of the rundown of your videos and the types of videos that you produced on the moral argument?
Well, I did a series on metaethics about a year ago. I basically started and I finished it up in about February. In conjunction with it, I did 2 videos on the moral argument, which are not really part of metaethics. They're more of like looking at moral realism within metaethics and making a metaphysical argument from there. So I basically just wanted to make an argument about the overview of the most used views in metaethics. I left a lot out, to be fair. And then I wanted to argue for moral realism, specifically non-natural moral realism, and then offer some critiques, some of the major views, like the views in non-cognitivism, different forms of relativism.
Filthy non-naturalist. And here we go. We're already in the problems, right? Well, what is this like? What is this non-natural property? Yeah.
J.L. Mackey's error theory, etc. So that was just the basis of it. And then on top of that, I built 2 arguments for the moral argument on top of that. I didn't use Craig's moral argument. I'm not a big fan of that because I don't think it says enough. So I presented my own moral argument of that, and I just defended it over 2 basic videos.
Yeah, so in my study of the moral argument, I've noticed basically 2 big parts of it. And the first part is sort of establishing that moral realism is true. And in Craig's version of the argument, that's premise 2. And then the second part of the argument is establishing that God is in some way necessary for morality. And that's his premise 1 of the argument. But before we do that, and we're not getting into Craig's argument, like I said, or like you just said. So why don't we, let's get a rundown of like the list of premises in your argument, and then we can sort of address each one by one.
Okay, so the basic argument I put forward, I base it on Linda I never can pronounce this right, Linda Zebsky's moral argument. So my basic goes premise 1, morality is a rational enterprise. Premise 2, if moral realism is true, meaning moral values and duties exist. Premise 3, the moral problems and disagreements among humans are too much for us to...
Premise 1's already begging the question. Morality is a rational enterprise. Well, not for the moral anti-realist or the non-cognitivist. Let's have a look. What else? What did he say?
Moral argument. So my basic goes premise 1, morality is a rational enterprise.
Begging the question.
Premise 2, if moral realism is true, meaning moral values and duties exist. Premise 3, the moral problem...
Yeah, he should have probably started out, if morality is a rational enterprise. If, and then like moral realism is true, moral obligations exist, which is, again, necessarily begging the question, because I think you could argue that there isn't duties and obligations when you're a utilitarian, or depending on your normative framework, but whatever.
Problems and disagreements among humans are too much for us to assume moral values and duties are grounded in...
This is the worst, like, duties and obligations are too much for us to assume as humans. Like, say, why? Like, to understand as humans, like, I don't understand that.
Human source of rationality. Premise 4, moral facts and duties are grounded in a necessary rational source. Premise 5, this source is what we call God. So I'm basically arguing, I defend in a little bit more detail in the videos, but the basic argument is if morality is objective, if it is irrational, as it's not a natural enterprise, it's a rational enterprise. If that's the case, it has to be grounded in a necessary rational source, and then we just call this source God. So that's basically the form of the argument. And so I understand the most controversial premise would be premise 2, moral realism is true. And so I've done a couple videos defending that as well.
Yeah, so let's just go ahead and jump into that, into the...
I don't know why he thinks that the most controversial premise is that moral realism is true, because I think the most controversial premise, at least from what I understood, it was like, it was the third premise, that if moral realism is true, we can't understand it. It's like, whoa, wait a minute, why?
Like, discussion about moral realism, and I know that before we came on, you had a couple books that were right next to you, where a couple atheists are basically defending moral realism.
I don't know if he said we can't understand it, but we couldn't be the foundation of it.
So why don't we into the... You can show them if you want, but...
Well, if you want to know some books on all this, I highly recommend this book here, Metaethics by Andrew Fisher. He's not arguing for a particular view, but he does a really good job presenting a lot of the arguments. Another great book defending moral realism would be Ruche Furlando's book, Moral Realism of Defense. Thomas Nagel's got some great papers. This is another good book called Mind and Cosmos. He goes into some other topics as well, other than just ethics. For natural moral realists, everyone talks about Sam Harris's ethical naturalism. I think a better book would be Moral Realism by Kevin DeLapp. He's an ethical naturalist, and I think he's more honest. I think he's more open. He addresses a lot more objections that are present in philosophy. So if you want any good books on it, I highly recommend those books and whatnot. And I'll be referring to them probably more than likely throughout the discussion.
All right, so let's jump into your argument for moral realism. Like, let's just jump into it.
Well, first, I wanted to ask Alex a question if he's okay with that.
Of course.
Yeah. What is your specific metaethical view? Because when I watched your videos, I wasn't really sure where you were coming from. Sometimes I thought you
when was this made? Because then we're gonna have to find whether Alex. I'll posit of whether I don't know if Alex was an objectivist at this point.
For a position of relativism, sometimes I thought maybe it was non-cognitive. I couldn't really nail down exactly where you were arguing from.
Yeah, I'll probably agree that the moral realism is probably the least objectionable premise.
Would probably be best described as a non-cognitivist. I wouldn't call myself a relativist for the fact that
he's not a non-cognitivist anymore, so that's like gonna splash this debate into some new, different ground.
In effect, I suppose it could be summed up as the view that moral propositions hold no truth value. So I wouldn't say I'm a relativist because I wouldn't say that people can be true dependent on their culture or their opinion, let's say. I would argue that they can't be true, but they also can't be false. I think it's probably quite close to emotivism. However, okay. I don't think the reason that I wouldn't call myself an emotivist is because I don't think that when someone says this is good, that what they mean is that, the boo hurrah theory, the idea that they just disapprove of it. I think that they do mean something more than that. I just think that what they mean can't be justified in objective terms. It can't be shown to be true or false in an objective sense. This is another problem I have. Sometimes when I say this, like when I say moral propositions have no truth, I think it needs to be understood that when I talk in those terms, what I mean to say is that it has no objective truth. It seems an odd thing to say that there can be such thing as subjective truth, but for instance, I'm not denying that people subjectively feel something is true, if you know what I mean. It's an objective fact that people subjectively experience something as though it were true. I just don't think that moral statements, no matter what they are, can be objectively either demonstrated, but even if they couldn't be demonstrated, I don't think that they could be.
He doesn't hold this position anymore, guys, which is pretty cool. He's now like at least somewhat an objectivist, but it's like a psychological egoist. So yeah.
Be objectively true or false. I don't know what you'd call that. Perhaps non-cognitivism is a fair label.
I mean, we can just go with general non-cognitive for now, maybe not pick the specific view in there, because there's a lot of different non-cognitive views. So what do you mean?
You said that really fast. And let's try to get some of the definitions of these terms really quickly for those that might not be familiar with meta-ethics. So yeah, let's talk about cognitivism versus non-cognitivism.
Well, most views can be summed up in either one of those two. A cognitivist would say that moral statements have like a truth aptness status. So when I say murder is wrong or rape is wrong, that can either be true or false. A non-cognitivist says that they can't be true or false, that it's just something we feel. And so like if I desire something, well, desires can't be true or false. Or if I have a feeling or emotion, that can't be true or false. And that's kind of what a non-cognitivist does. And there's various forms: prescriptivism, emotivism, expressivism, quasi-realism, etc. So that's sort of the difference between cognitive and non-cognitivists. Moral realists or cognitivists, as well as relativists are, and error theorists, we would say that when someone makes a moral claim, they are expressing something true or false. Non-cognitivists say they're not, essentially.
Yeah, whether the truth or, well, whether our claims are truth apt or not. It's pretty much what we're talking about with moral realism and moral anti-realism, or moral non-cognitivism. You get like the in-between, which is like quasi-realism or moral subjectivism, which is usually like norm expressivism or something like that. Stevenson or Blackburn, they typically say like, look, the foundations are attitudes or feelings and desires, but then we can build up a system from that. I disagree with that, and I ultimately think that's fundamentally impossible in terms of understanding the self, and I think it runs into the free geek problem.
So Alex, you said that moral statements or moral facts, I guess, can't be demonstrated. So what can you explain what you mean by that? They can't be demonstrated.
Well, that's actually I sort of mentioned that in passing. I almost regret having phrased it that way because I don't think that necessarily has any relevance in the sense that there are certain moral propositions that even if you accepted an objective, even atheistic case, there are certain propositions that can't be demonstrated, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it follows on that they're not objective. So this is a confusion that actually cropped up when I made my video.
Just hit 5K subs, man. How you doing?
So people seem to think that what I meant by objective was the ability to demonstrate something is true. That's not what I mean at all. Sam Harris gives a good example in The Moral Landscape, a book otherwise that I have too many problems to name with, but he gives the example of, if I were to ask you how many people were bitten by mosquitoes in the past hour worldwide, there is an answer to that, and that answer is an objective truth. Now, we couldn't possibly demonstrate that objective truth. We don't have the means, but that's not to say that it's not objective. So
yeah, so this is the difference between like something being like truth apt and shown to be true, right? Demonstrably true. It's like if something can be truth apt in principle, then it's a truth apt statement. Usually that's how we take it. Like, and this is why the words in principle are very important. So like if we could prove the existence of like, I don't know, like the cause of the universe, like in principle, then it would be truth apt if we make a claim like that it was caused by, like, I don't know, God or the Big Bang, whatever kind of cause you want to take. But if you were to say that it's not truth apt, then any claim that you make ultimately couldn't be shown to be a knowledge claim. Like it could never be falsifiable or verifiable, which means that there can be no knowledge about it. We can never actually come to conclusions that are justified and true.
So we can say, for instance, if I said that there were an even number of people who'd been bitten by mosquitoes in the past hour, I know that that is either objectively true or false. So I know that it's, let's say, in the realm of objectivity without even being able to demonstrate either way. So with a moral proposition, if you say that murder is wrong, it's not the fact that you can't demonstrate that makes it not objective. That's just kind of a side part. The reason that it's not objective is not because you can't demonstrate it. So although I think that there are moral statements that you couldn't demonstrate, I don't think that's why they're not objective.
Okay, so then why would they not be objective? In your train of thought, why would you say they're not objective? What would be your reasons? Just general overview, you don't have to go too much into detail.
Sure thing. Well, I think it's important to define what we mean by objective. This is where a lot of the confusion lies. And as far as I'm concerned, for something to be objectively true, it must be true, or something to be objectively true or false, it must be true or false regardless of, let's say, human conviction. It must be true or false regardless of whether or not people want it to be true or think that it's true. So for me, morality is a kind of, it's a thought, it's an expression, it's something that can't be said to be true without humans thinking that it's true, but because all morality is humans thinking something is true. It's difficult to put in.
You have to, where's the metaphysical argument? I don't think he's necessarily thought about it very much, which is why he's like ended up, jumping train later on. Like, obviously, right now he's like a young baby philosopher and he's running on his intuitions. I think a little bit more. And I think as he's looked into it, he's realized, wait a minute, what's the metaphysical arguments behind this in terms of anti-realism? And then he's been convinced by the objective side. He's just moved to a form of egoism, which I think is probably a lot easier to maintain metaphysically. It's not I wouldn't say it's right. I don't think it's justified, especially when we're looking at like how egos form and are constructed, and how our understandings of self exist in a socio-political relationship. But ultimately, I think that he's jumped ship because I think he hadn't really thought about things yet.
Into words, it kind of like my meta-ethical view tends to kind of emerge from discussions when you start putting the pieces together. But as far as I'm concerned, in order to say that morality is objective, you would need to ground your morality in something that is not human opinion. You need to ground it in something either naturalistic, that is to say the kind of thing that Sam Harris tries to do, or you need to ground it in supernaturalism, which I think is unjustified. And even if you ground it in supernaturalism, this is what my first video tried to demonstrate, I don't think even then you could say that morality is objective. So the only way that I think you could truly show morality to be objective is to come up with some naturalistic synonym for words like good or bad or ought or ought not. And I think, as I think you probably think, I don't think you can do that. I don't think that naturalism is a valid meta-ethical view.
Now, I want to go back to one thing you said, because I thought you might just be begging the question.
And now he's a naturalist. Like, at least he's a solid philosopher, man, because it takes a philosopher to change their mind and admit they're wrong.
Question against a moral realist. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but you said all morality is thinking it's true. Is that correct?
Well, I suppose I would say that when you make a moral statement, the person, what I meant by that was that when you make a moral statement, most people intuitively think that. So, like you say, when someone says that murder is wrong or the Holocaust was wrong, that's a classic. They have no doubt in their mind that that is true. What I'm trying to say with that is basically making the case that even though they think it's true, that's all it is. They think it's true, but it's not actually objectively true.
So then let me ask you this. I mean, one of the reasons most philosophers are more realistic, I think their last poll was like 56% are, is because it's just so dang intuitive. So when you say all that it is that it's thinking of it. My issue with that is like, well, I mean, everything we think is technically subjective. I mean, everything about science we think is subjectively processed in the mind. Everything about mathematics or logic is. That doesn't mean those are subjective. I mean, that just means that's how we experience it. It's kind of confusing epistemology with ontology. Just because we may experience morality subjectively, that does not necessarily mean there aren't objective moral facts out there. Just like we experience.
But it's like, do we experience reality subjectively? I don't think that we do entirely. I think we experience it intersubjectively. And I think that the engagement in intersubjective relationships with others basically implies the existence of a reality which can be understood and known. And like, look, like the way in which we actually divest the world isn't based off like this first person position from which we are born in and then sort of work things out and map onto the world exactly how it is. We are engaged in a language and we are engaged in communication in order to understand a common domain. And it's like, even though we are coming from a first person perspective, even though we are coming from like a quote unquote subjective position, the way in which we understand reality, I don't think is subjective at all. And I hope that's what he's going to try and express in terms of epistemics.
Science.
But even in terms of metaphysics, I don't think that we are metaphysically, stuck in this subjective framework.
We actually have to experience it subjectively through our own cognitive senses and whatnot. So why would it follow that just because that's how we experience it, that it necessarily is subjective?
Well, I think that if you are going to be technical about it, then you have to accept that things like science or the scientific method ultimately do rely on our subjective experience of existence. But the way that I would get around that is as follows. I would subscribe. So I subscribe to that notion that we have to kind of begrudgingly accept the fact that I can never really know whether or not I'm really having this conversation, whether or not you two are really.
This is the issue of the hard, solipsism. But then, look, you don't have to. You can know, because know is like dismissing, like to have a knowledge claim is not to say that there isn't any possible falsity or falsehood. It's to accept that there is fallibilism, and fallibilism must be the case, that we must accept that there is that we are wrong in relation to like how we understand reality to some degree. It's whether we accept the negative as being stronger than the positive.
Speaking to me, or whether I'm just a brain being stimulated in a lab. So that's a problem, but I don't think that necessarily closes down the debate, because I can say things. For instance, I subscribe to Descartes' notion, I think therefore I am. I think it's fair to say that in order to even be under the illusion that I'm here having this conversation, I need to exist in some form. So to me, that says that existence is a thing. Existence exists, if you know what I mean. So yeah, there is such thing as existence. Now, if I say that there is a cup sat in front of me, which I think I have here, as a scientific worldview, like you say, because I have to interpret that through my senses, which I don't know if I can trust, I don't know whether or not this glass objectively exists. However, I do know that it either objectively exists or objectively doesn't. The statement, this...
See, like, I disagree. I think that you don't necessarily, like, I would say that, like, it's a very, like, the problem with the Cartesian approach is this, and this is actually, I've actually got a debate that I need to upload between me, Cosmic Skeptic, and Rationality Rules, debating Descartes, actually. I should probably upload that, like, tomorrow or something, if you are interested in it. And I basically, I defend Kant. I take Kant's actual attack on Descartes, right? And I think that Descartes assumes the I. I think Descartes assumes a first-person understanding of reality. He assumes the ego. And that's one of the issues that you need to overcome, to realize that, look, your actual understanding of reality is not individualistic by nature. Individualism itself is a conclusion that is being reached, even in terms of philosophical, philosophical development. And what we instead are constructed in relation to is a dialectic, which is essentially allowed for the construction of concepts from which we actualize and express from our first person positions. But yeah, like, I think that, like, you genuinely taking the Cartesian approach is usually leads to this idea of, like, we begin as egos, that we begin from, like, as, like, established conscious beings, and I think that, like, self-conscious beings, and I think that is demonstrably untrue.
This cup exists is either objectively true or it is objectively false. So yes, I do have to interpret that through my subjective senses, but I can still know that that's either objectively true or false. Whereas with morality, I'd go further than that and say that it can't be in principle objectively true or false. So
that's
it doesn't
what
matter to me.
To say. Like, you need to make the point that it's in principle, that it's metaphysically separate or epistemologically separate, in order to overcome, like, the companions in guilt and go, like, look, like, there is, like, a realism towards the world. It's just that morality's not part of it.
Necessarily the process by which we're coming to the conclusion. Rather, I'm just saying that the conclusion has to be either that the cup does exist or doesn't exist, and we may never be able to know that, but we know that it still lies within the realm of objectivity. That statement, the cup exists, lies within the realm of objectivity because it either objectively exists or doesn't, whereas morality doesn't do that. So yes, I have to interpret both, because, well, I suppose I'd have to ask your case. I'd have to say, let's put it this way, as of yet, I'm unconvinced that it does, so I'd like to know, let's say, why you think that it could reside in the realm of objectivity, and then I can tell you why I find that unconvincing. That's about as far as I could go.
Okay, yeah, I've been asking you questions for a while. I can kind of present my case here. So basically, the main reason that someone like Thomas Nagel or Kai Nelson would say that moral realism is most likely true is how the moral duties and values would manifest in moral actions or in reality itself. So, like, take, for example, another normative ought. Like, we ought to be intelligent. Now, if we met someone who just watched Jersey Shore all day, or Georgie Shore, because I know you're in Britain, they said they aren't really interested in learning philosophy, they don't want to be intelligent, we would be like, okay, well, that's not a pragmatic solution. That's not we don't really necessarily agree with that. But we wouldn't say that they...
I like that. So let's just take someone who's watching Geordie Shore to take the position, I don't want to be intelligent. I like that. I really like that. You make good content, non-criminally underrated. Basically too good for YouTube. Buy yourself a pint, sir. Happy 5K. Oh, thank you very much, Australian School Swift. I really appreciate it. Man. Thanks for the donation.
Did anything wrong. We wouldn't say that they're doing something objectively wrong. We just say they're not being a very pragmatic individual. When we study moral facts, specifically duties and values, they tend to manifest in a way in reality within our actions that tend to be objective. So although we may disagree on the correct normative status, virtue ethics versus deontology versus type of utilitarianism, everyone does agree that the way they manifest appears to be pretty objective. It's really hard to act out or even to disagree with someone that says that female mutilation is a good thing. If someone says that, we would be like, no, it isn't. I mean, that's clearly...
Get to the metaphysics, people. The metaphysics. I need to hear it. You can't talk about the metaphysics of moral, like whether like morals are truth apt or not epistemically, without having like some sort of like metaphysical claim and then discussing like whether this is falsifiable or not. Come on, man.
Something we would want to debate. So moral facts tend to manifest in reality the same way logical facts tend to manifest. They're objective, independent.
Sorry, not Australian. Austrian. Very sorry, Austrian School Swift. I'm very sorry. You're from the enlightened European. The enlightened continental. But thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Even if we may not agree, if someone may disagree or may think something else. So the basic argument, and I can give you a quick quote here from Kai Nelson, for example. Kai Nelson says, "It is more reasonable to believe such elements, things like wife beating and child abuse, are evil than to believe any skeptical theory that tells us we cannot know or reasonably believe any of these things to be evil. I firmly believe that this is bedrock and right, and that anyone who does not believe it cannot have probed deeply enough into the grounds of his own moral belief. So,
but why? But why would you be able to say that? Like that, you need to instantiate that claim, right? Like you can't just like hold that claim without it being, without it being grounded. Like you can't just go like, oh well, if you don't believe this, then you're less rational. That's like that's just unphilosophical, right?
Kai Nelson, David Brink, Richard Boyd, I'll argue, from a basic intuitive standpoint, moral realism is pretty intuitive. If we're going to apply this principle of credulity, we have to accept that it is at least our intuitive starting point. This seems to be the case as we act in reality, as things manifest in moral experience or through things like moral progress. So if that's the case, the skeptic has to mount an argument against how they I don't want to use the word natural, how they basically just simply appear within reality, how they tend to manifest between moral agents. So what would be a good skeptical argument for doubting our basic intuitive starting point?
Well, I'd say because that's effectively the basic premise of skepticism. That the whole point of skepticism is that you take nothing for granted. So something like the, let's say the principle of credulity, as long as I understand the same thing as you do by that, I take to be a horrible idea. It's true that we intuitively feel that morality is the case, but that in no way to me, I don't see how you could say that because we feel something more strongly, we have more reason to believe that it's the case.
Well, it's not so much a feel.
I definitely disagree. I don't believe in. You're not an intuitionist, are you, Marty? You're not surely not a filthy intuitionist.
Schaefer Lando defines intuitions as conscious experiential states.
Just memeing them.
Things he says is like, let me ask you this right now. He uses a pretty good example.
Actually, I just realized this. Actually, you're absolutely right. Like, is this guy just going to take G.E. Moore? Like, I'm just realized, is this guy going to take G.E. Moore's position? Is that what's going on? Like, is he just going to go like, oh, I just intuitively, know what is good? Like, man, that's why I'm a non-naturalist.
Montreal right now. Now, without looking it up, without actually going to Montreal, it tends to be a pretty reasonable argument. That's a good starting point to assume. We don't assume any alien abductions have happened within the past 5 minutes. We tend to just start with an intuitive, reasonable point right there. And so the principle of credulity...
Yeah, you're a good lad. I know you're not an intuitionist. I didn't think you were. That's a good lad.
It doesn't say we just believe what we feel. It says we take what seems to be so as indeed unless someone has positive reasons to doubt. Take A theory of time. I don't think A theory of time is true, but it seems pretty intuitive. We have pretty good scientific evidence that B theory of time is most likely true. So we have good reason to doubt our intuition there. So my basic point would be, as most moral philosophers that are more realists argue, is like, why should we doubt this if it seems so intuitively obvious? If moral facts manifest in a way that are objective, why would we doubt that they're not objective like the laws of logic are?
Because historically, the things that have been most important to discuss philosophically are things that we used to take for granted.
So why, at this point, doesn't Cosmic Skeptic just go like, use the G.E. Moore, open-ended argument, right? Like, what does the word good mean? That's why I'm doubting it, because I have no idea what you're talking about. I can't help but doubt it, like.
It's like, yes, it's true that we have very, very strong intuition of moral duty, but in the same way, I have an incredibly strong intuition that I have free will. And previously, either speaking previously in terms of the species or previously in terms of my own personal experience, I had very strong intuitions that God existed. These are now things that I'm convinced, either in the case of free will, I'm convinced of the exact opposite. And
why? Why are you convinced that they're not?
Because the reason that I was even able to have that discussion was because I didn't trust that intuition, or the moment that I questioned that intuition was the moment that I could delve into it. Now, let's say that I have a very strong intuition that God exists, as I think most people do, especially at a young age. I'm sure that you two did too. I don't know your history in Christianity. I don't know if you've always been Christians, but let's take someone who has.